These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More information at hellofresh.com, code TOM. CB Distillery for sleeping and pain relief. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. Annie's Kit Clubs, creativity delivered right to your door. More info is available at annieskitclubs.com/Tom. EasyFlow, personal air filtration system. Fresh air anywhere. More info at easyflowusa.com, code Tom. Masterclass with world-class instructors. More info at masterclass.com/Hartman. And Dinovite, only the best all-natural pet supplements. More info at dinovite.com.
We say fight back!
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Defying Hitler by Sebastian Haffner, a memoir. This is from chapter 17, about a little more than a third of the way into the book. At first, the revolution only gave the impression of being an historical event like any other, a matter for the press that might just possibly have some effect on the public mood. The Nazis celebrate January 30th as their day of revolution. They are wrong. There was no revolution on January 30th, 1933, just a change of government. Hitler became chancellor, by no means the Führer of the Nazi regime. The cabinet contained only 2 Nazis apart from him. He swore an oath of allegiance to the Weimar Constitution. The general opinion was that it was not the Nazis who had won, but the bourgeois parties of the right, who had captured, in quotes, the Nazis and held all the key positions in the government. In constitutional terms, events had taken a much more conventional, unrevolutionary course than most of what had happened during the previous 6 months. Outwardly also, the day had no revolutionary aspects, unless one considers a Nazi torchlight procession through Wilhelmstrasse or a minor gunfight in the suburbs that night as signs of a revolution. For most of us outsiders, the experience of January 30th, 1933 was that of reading the papers and the emotions we felt while we were doing so. The morning headline was, "Hitler called to president." That produced a certain nervous, impotent irritation. Hitler had been called to the president in August and November. He had been offered the vice-chancellorship and then the chancellorship. Both times he had set impossible conditions, and both times there had been solemn declarations. Never again. Each time, never again had lasted exactly 3 months. Hitler's opponents in Germany at that time suffered from a compulsive urge to offer him everything he wanted, indefatigably, and at an even cheaper price. Indeed, to press it upon him. It's the same now with his opponents outside Germany. Again and again, this appeasement was formally renounced, and again it gaily reappeared at the crucial moment. Just so today. Then, as now, one's only hope was Hitler's own unreasonableness. Would it not sooner or later exhaust the patience of his opponents? Then, as now, it became apparent that their patience knew no bounds. At midday, the headline said, "Hitler makes impossible demands." We nodded, half reassured. It was only too credible. It would have gone against his nature to ask for less than too much. Perhaps the cup had once more passed from us. Hitler, the last defense against Hitler. At about 5 o'clock, the evening papers arrived. Cabinet of National Unity formed Hitler Reichschancellor. I don't know what the general reaction was. For about a minute, mine was completely correct. Icy horror. Certainly this had been a possibility for a long time. You had to reckon with it. Nevertheless, it was so bizarre, so incredible to read it now in black and white. Hitler Reichschancellor. For a moment, I physically sensed the man's odor of blood and filth, the nauseating approach of a man-eating animal, its foul, sharp claws in my face. Then I shook the sensation off, tried to smile, started to consider, and found many reasons for reassurance. That evening, I discussed the prospects of the new government with my father. We agreed it had a good chance of doing a lot of damage, but not much chance of surviving very long. A deeply reactionary government with Hitler as its mouthpiece. Apart from this, it did not really differ much from the two governments that had succeeded Bruning's. Even with the Nazis, it would not have a majority in the Reichstag. Of course, that could always be dissolved, but the government had a clear majority of the population against it, in particular the working class, which would probably go communist now that the Social Democrats had completely discredited themselves. One could prohibit the communists, but that would only make them more dangerous. In the meantime, the government would be likely to implement reactionary social and cultural measures with some anti-Semitic additions to please Hitler. That would not attract any of its opponents to its side. Foreign policy would probably be a matter of banging the table. There might be an attempt to rearm. That would automatically add the outside world to the 60% of the home population who were against the Hitler government. Besides, who were the people who had suddenly started voting Nazi in the last 3 years? Misguided ignoramuses, for the most part, victims of propaganda, a fluctuating mass that would fall apart at the first disappointment. No, all things considered, this government was not a cause for alarm. The only question was what would come after it. It was possible that they would drive the country to civil war. The communists were capable of going on the attack before a prohibition against them came into force. The next day, this turned out to be the general opinion of the intelligent press. It is curious how plausible an argument it is, even today, when we know what came next. How could things turn out so completely different? Perhaps it was just because we were all so certain that they could not do so, and relied on that with far too much confidence. So we neglected to consider that it might, if worse came to worse, be necessary to prevent the disaster from happening. Through the whole of February 1933, everything that happened remained a matter for the press. In other words, it took place in an arena that would lose all reality for 99% of the population the moment there were no newspapers. Admittedly, enough occurred in that arena. The Reichstag was dissolved, then in a flagrant breach of the Constitution, Hindenburg also dissolved the Prussian regional parliament. There were fast and furious changes of personnel in the civil service. The book defined Hitler.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Well, happy Tuesday the 13th. Oh, what a day. The Derek Chauvin trial is back on, and the defense is presenting their case. Now, it seems like what they're going to try and do is just play one video after another from body cam footage of police officers interacting with, arresting, George Floyd in the past. This is the old portray the guy as the evil guy strategy. So, we will be checking in an hour and a half or so with Debbie Hines about the Chauvin trial on that. I'm also in this hour, I want to get into this question of how could a 26-year veteran of the police mistake a gun for a taser? I have some thoughts on that, and we'll get to that. In our second hour, how will these ruthless anti-vaxxers, I see this as the new sabotage attempt by the GOP to sabotage a Democratic president. How much is that going to cost America in terms of lives, in terms of, just human loss, productivity, money, everything else? And then in our third hour, Meagan Hatcher-Hayes is here with us of indivisible.org. And we'll be getting into this whole question about D.C. statehood and all the other stuff that is D.C. statehood likely, all this other stuff that Indivisible is working on right now. Okay? It's pretty comprehensive. So all that said, the piece that I published this morning over at HartmannReport.com, kind of my rant for the day, is titled, Like the Nazis and the Fascists. That would be Hitler's Nazis and Mussolini's Fascists. The Republican Party must be purged. And it must not be allowed to live on with its own lost cause like the Confederacy did. And, I lay this right out. President Joe Biden has basically stopped negotiating with Republicans. He had some Republicans over to the White House yesterday and said, well, okay, here's my package. What do you think? And this morning on I don't recall if it was NPR or CNN, I heard, I'm pretty sure it was CNN, heard Roger Wicker, the Republican senator from Louisiana, saying, well, Biden's $600 billion infrastructure package. And I'm like, what? What happened to the $2.1 trillion? Oh, the Republicans are trying to reinvent it. I see. Now I get it. So, bottom line, Joe Biden has largely said, okay, we're not going to negotiate with these people anymore. And the reason why, and, of course, Biden hasn't said this, but I think it's becoming fairly obvious, the Republican Party is no longer a legitimate political party. It's just not. In fact, there's this group, it's called the Global Party Survey, globalpartysurvey.com or .org. I don't recall which, but it's right out there. Some work done at Harvard and in the U.S. and Sydney University in Australia. And the researchers note, first of all, they drew on a survey data from 1,800 party and election experts, 21 core items to estimate key ideological values, issue positions, and populist rhetoric. And they examined 1,127 political parties in 170 countries. And what they found was that the Democratic Party is kind of right solidly in the norm for democracies. The Democratic Party functions much like its counterparts in Canada or Germany or France or England or whatever it may be. But the Republican Party, today's modern Republican Party in the United States, it is most similar to Hungary's Fidesz party or Turkey's AKP party or Poland's SIP or PIS party, excuse me. And all three are fascist parties. I mean, this is shocking, right? I mean, Turkey is the world's leading jailer of journalists, something that Trump advocated aggressively, as does much of the Republican Party. Poland's political party regularly threatens to put judges in jail when they don't rule the way that the party wants. In Hungary, they scapegoat immigrants as a strategy to gain and grow political power. And, Orban in Hungary is probably the best example of this. When he took over Fidesz back in 2010, this political party, it was sort of like the GOP. It was a regular conservative party. And then he started campaigning on Christian purity, restoring Christian purity to Hungary, and his slogan was making Hungary great again. This was 10 years ago, 11 years ago. And his rallies drew tens of thousands of people. His major campaign promise was building a wall across the southern part of Hungary to keep out Syrian refugees. He, by the way, kept that promise. He built that wall. He altered the nation's constitution so he could gerrymander places so that he'd always win elections. He's packed the courts so completely, sort of like Mitch McConnell and Donald Trump putting 270 people in our federal courts. He's packed the courts so completely that he never loses cases anymore. His party has rewritten textbooks to talk about essentially, the phrase, refugees entering the country are a threat because it can be problematic for different cultures to coexist. And then he started locking up refugee children in cages. When the Hungarian Helsinki Committee complained about the children in cages, he said, well, we have to do that because they pose a security risk and endanger the continent's Christian culture and identity. See, he's just saying out loud what the Trumpkins and the Republicans are kind of saying in code. And 5 years to the week before American Nazis rallied in Charlottesville, a bunch of guys in Hungary marched down to the Roma community, the people that used to be called gypsies. Now it's kind of a slur, but if you're not familiar with the word Roma, that's who it was. And after the head of his party had called them animals and vermin. And so it was like a Charlottesville kind of rally, and they, you know, with torches saying, "We will burn your houses down." So how did this happen in the United States? Well, the first step was in 76 and 78, when a new Republican majority, thanks to Richard Nixon on the Supreme Court, ruled that if billionaires or corporations want to own politicians, want to throw money into the political sphere, that's not corruption, which is what we used to call it, or bribery, which is what we used to call it. That is really just free speech. It's not money. It's free speech. First Amendment protected free speech. And so, you know, here we go, you know, and now you've got billionaire networks that are actually, like the Koch network is actually bigger than the Republican Party. And they do not want their taxes raised to pay for your social programs. The second step was in the 90s when Newt Gingrich arrived in D.C. with his contract on America, which boiled down to basically tax cuts and deregulation. The third step was Donald Trump, you know, just saying now out loud what Nixon and Reagan and both Bushes, you know, with the Willie Horton ads and everything else, were saying, that the Republican Party post-1965 is now officially the party of white supremacy. Democratic Party left that behind in 65. And then the fourth step is the classic fascist strategy. It's called the big lie. Mussolini's big lie was that Italy got screwed at the end of World War I, that they really didn't lose. That was Hitler's first big lie, too, or his big lie throughout the thing was that Germany had been stabbed in the back, was his phrase. Stabbed in the back by socialists and Jews who had negotiated the end of World War I. And they stabbed, Hitler went with this. And then Trump came along with his big lie, which is that he actually won the 2020 election, which he did not. He lost it. And you know, the biggest part of his big lie is that there was this massive voter fraud, especially in black cities like Detroit, Philadelphia, Milwaukee, Atlanta. I mean, and so now you've got a Republican Party that is so completely controlled by billionaires who don't want their taxes to go up that even really popular programs like COVID relief, they are 100% opposed to. You've got a Republican Party that has now embraced white supremacy, and you've got now, you know, Tucker Carlson pitching the same thing on Fox News. He doubled down last night on his whole great replacement theory that, anonymous forces are trying to, well, this is not his words but mine, but are trying to replace white people in America. Right. I'm of the opinion that the Republican Party needs to either be torn down and rebuilt from the bottom up by the never-Trumpers. There's still some Republicans out there. Or it needs to be banned, purged, done away with. And if it's purged, we can't let them continue their big lie about election fraud. Like the South continued their lost cause.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
So what say you? Am I missing something here about the GOP or about what we might do about it? Are there any solutions that you can think of? There are, as they say, lines open if you want to give us a shout, if you have things that you want to share with us about these things. But this whole Republican big lie thing is so problematic for our democracy, for America, for us to try to continue to have a country that functions, to try to continue to have a country that in any way is functional, is just going to be startlingly difficult as long as we don't have, well, as long as we have a political party that is completely dedicated, or largely dedicated, it seems to me completely dedicated, essentially to fascism. And, what do we do with this? What do we do about this? It's, sorry about that. It's like, at times I'm like, what do we do with this? And it seems to me that if we don't just own this, if we don't just say this out loud, that the Republican Party is no longer a legitimate political party, that it has abandoned any pretense of legitimacy, that it has left behind, long behind, any right to claim that it itself is a legitimate political party. If we don't start saying this out loud and pointing out that when they obstruct everything, I mean, obstructing COVID relief, right? I mean, think about that for a minute. They're going to obstruct relief to people hard hit by a pandemic during the worst pandemic in the history of the United States, or at least the second worst. I get it that the Spanish flu killed 500,000 Americans, but well, hey, we're there. Actually, I think it killed 800,000 now that I think about it. But whatever it was, I mean, we have a political party that says, oh yeah, you want to do that? No big deal. No big deal. It's incredible. Dennis in Aptos, California. Hey, Dennis, what's on your mind?
Yeah, hi. Well, a couple of points. One would be about Hungary. They've got kind of a history of being sort of a right-wing nation anyway. When there was the Austria-Hungarian Empire, the Magyars, who are Hungarians, they were like the ruling people in that upper Balkans region, and they ruled the roost. They saw themselves as being better than the Serbians or the Croatians or the Slovenes. There's a history there. And then Italy with Mussolini. Italy was on the Allies.
But we have that similar history, Dennis. We've got a 400-year history of white supremacy.
Oh, exactly. So that's when I'm kind of making a comparison. There's no surprise that someone like Orban would become the dictator for life in Hungary, as he has. Yeah, and Italy, Italy was on the Allies. Their problem with Mussolini was that they didn't add any colonial territory after World War I, and he had a beef about that.
Yeah. Well, that was his whole sales pitch. Mussolini's was,
right.
We're going to restore the empire in the Mediterranean. Yep. Dennis, thank you. Thank you. Excellent points all. We'll be right back. It's coming up on 20 minutes past the hour. Share the Thom Hartmann Program with your friends. We're available on SiriusXM, Free Speech TV, Pacifica, commercial stations nationwide, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, on the Thom Hartmann app, and you can even tell your smart speaker to listen to the Thom Hartmann Program. So a while ago at Davos, Michael Dell, the computer billionaire who started out selling computers out of his dorm room in college. I was running CompuServe forums back in the day. This is in the late 70s or the early 80s, and he was selling them on CompuServe in my forums. And, now he's worth billions. And somebody asked him, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is proposing a 70% tax bracket for people who make the kind of money you make. What do you think of that? And his response was, a 70% tax rate? Name a country where that ever worked. Ever. And it turns out there is such a country, and apparently Michael Dell didn't know this. I think a lot of Americans don't know this, that there was a country that had its greatest period of prosperity in its entire history with a top tax rate that was above 70%. In fact, it hit 90% for more than half the time, and that was the United States of America. It's a new video over at ThomHartmann.com. Okay, so yesterday on Twitter, Alex Blagg tweeted, we interrupt our interruption of the police killing trial with another police killing to bring you this breaking news of another high school shooting. And then somebody else, salty retorter, replied to him saying, the Tennessee school shooting was interrupted by yet another school shooting in Los Angeles. This was all yesterday. As Tucker Carlson continues to promote, this racist theory and re-embrace the whole lost cause and whatnot. But, the second topic I wanted to raise is how can a police officer mistake a gun for a taser? which is the question, at the top of the New York Times, actually, which is, a reasonable question. I mean, how is that possible? A taser weighs 1/3 of what a gun does. 1/3. A taser has a very large grip. A police firearm has a much smaller grip. A taser has a flip lever safety on the side, the kind of Glocks that they use in this town of Minnesota. They have a safety as part of the trigger. You could feel all these things. They're different. The grips are different. The taser is bright yellow. I mean, how is it possible? I don't frankly think it is possible. Now, this is the 8th or 9th time a person has been killed in America by police who insisted that they were just pulling their taser. This time by Officer Kimberly Potter, who, by the way, who killed Mr. Wright, who, by the way, is the head of the police union and has 26 years on the force. And in fact, in the past has helped defend cops who killed unarmed black men, as the head of the union. The police manual, by the way, that, she's supposed to know, says that tasers should not be used against people, quote, whose position or activity may result in collateral injury, especially people who are, quote, operating vehicles. So here's Daunte Wright back in his car. She shoots him. The car drives off. I mean, that's the whole point of not using a taser on somebody who's sitting behind the wheel of a vehicle. 3 blocks later it crashes and he's dead, but it's like, really? This, one of the most widely known cases happened in Oakland back in 2009. This was with a white Bay Area transit officer, a BART cop, shot and killed an unarmed black man on New Year's Day at the Fruitville station. And this was Oscar Grant. You may recognize the name, Oscar Grant III. He was laying face down when the officer shot him. And he later said, "Oh, I meant to pull my taser." And he ended up 11 months in prison. And I think I agree with this sentiment that Daunte Wright is the new Oscar Grant. And I'm just not buying it that this woman knew that she had a taser in her hand, or believed that she had a taser in her hand. Not 26 years on the force, not the head of the police union, not somebody who has defended cops in this situation before. I'm just not buying it. Which raises the question, why would she yell taser, taser, taser unless she was performing for the body camera? I get it. Then there's that kind of shocked moment of, oh blank, I shot him. But, maybe that's part of the, maybe I know that the mainstream media is going out of their way to say, well, we have to give the officer the benefit of the doubt. BS. Somebody's dead. Why is there not liability for these things? Why are we still policing like it's the slave patrol days? I mean, we could ask the secondary question, why did we ever have the slave patrol days? But that is a little more kind of a different topic. But is it possible that an officer can mistake a gun for a taser? Like I said, we now have, this is the 8th or 9th case that New York Times is able to find. So what do we do with this? Where do we take this? How do we respond to this? Frank in Chicago. Hey, Frank. Whoop. There we go.
Hello,
Frank
Tom.
in Chicago.
Thanks.
Hey, Frank, what's on your mind?
Well, thanks for taking my call. My argument, Tom, is that if one is fearful for her or his life, she or he can make a stupid mistake, because I have made mistakes in my life. I'm not a police officer. I knew a police officer here in Chicago at the Robert Taylor Homes housing project, and she informed me that some nights she would go to work and she would be so scared that she would soil her pants.
Then she shouldn't be there. And by the way, the taser was on her left hip, and the gun was on her right hip. And she had the gun in her right hand. I mean, this is all, or actually, we don't know for sure that it was on her left hip. The other officers that we could see from her body camera, they had it on their left hips. She should have had it on her left hip. That's the protocol. So, you know, I get it, Frank, that people make mistakes when they're frightened. I totally get it. I totally agree. I totally understand. I'm just not buying it that that's what happened here. You know, maybe somebody can convince me. But Frank, thank you for the call. You know, this seems to me like an execution. Although, you know, what's the motive for the execution other than that he's black? Is that enough?
Listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
I mean, apparently it is for some cops, although typically there's at least some small provocation. Well, maybe jumping back in the car is the provocation. Anyway, we'll be back with your calls after this.
Our book today is My Life in the Black Party. The title is just another N-word, and it's by Field Marshal Don Cox, his life in the Black Panther Party. This is from Chapter 5, page 47. The chapter is titled, Use What You Got to Get What You Need. Before we entered into a direct relationship with the Panthers, our group had wanted to prove our worthiness by our actions. Since that was no longer in question, contact was made and a rendezvous fixed to meet at Huey's Pad on Telegraph Avenue in Oakland. I don't remember much about that first gathering, other than meeting David Hilliard, the Panther Party's chief of staff, for the first time. The only thing that stands out in my memory is a question from Huey as we were sipping coffee. He asked if I didn't think it better to be properly equipped before going into action. He suggested it was best to first rip off the necessary funds to get everything we needed in advance of launching a major effort. I had practically memorized his essay, The Correct Handling of a Revolution, in which he spoke of teaching by example. And so I blurted out the first thing that came to mind, which was, use what you got to get what you need. After a long, hot summer of 1967, with the rebellions in Newark, Detroit, and elsewhere, we felt that our preparations had, at least, put us on the same level as the rest of the country, and that the revolution would not pass us by. Our San Francisco group started attending and participating in any and all functions relevant to black people. And we tried to let everyone in our area, and we tried to get to know everyone in our area associated with the struggle. We also continued our community meetings. News of the death of Che Guevara in October of that year had us walking around in a stupor for a while, and although that came as a severe blow to the international struggle for freedom and justice of all people, we were proud to be among those who had responded to his battle cry and had picked up the fallen arms. Huey asked if we would conduct a meeting on Hunter's Point for him. He was supposed to go, but something had come up and he couldn't make it. We were honored that he thought enough of us to ask, and we were more than enthusiastic to do whatever he wanted. It was at that meeting that we had a new, surprising experience. We met our first resistance in the form of Adam Rogers. He was supposed to have been the biggest, baddest N-word on Hunter's Point, but when we encountered him, he came across like an Uncle Tom. He seemed to be impressed with our firearms demonstration, but he was violently against the idea of black people arming themselves for self-defense. He was convinced that would increase repression, even though history proved him wrong. When we examined the history of repression of black people, the only time there was significant decline in police violence and murders perpetrated against blacks was precisely the period when blacks were organized and had access to guns. Given the wave of terror and violence against blacks that continues to sweep the country, I truly believe there is a lesson to be learned from that fact. Rogers was one of the wounded in the Hunters Point Rebellion of the year before, and a photograph of him had been used by the news media to illustrate articles on the riots that broke out following the killing of a black teenager by police that September. Because of that, we were even more surprised by his reaction. It was not until later that we discovered that the administration of San Francisco Mayor Joseph Alito had sent in money after the rebellion and had bought off the so-called bad N-words. The same technique was used from coast to coast. Despite Rogers, most everyone seemed to like what we had to say and really related to the firearms demonstration. Several people wanted to take courses in handling weapons, and so I fixed a rendezvous for the following Saturday at the parking lot of the abandoned shopping center right on top of Hunters Point. The next day I arrived at the point at 7 in the morning in order to get set up before people began to gather. There wasn't going to be any target practice, but I would be firing a few shots in the air by way of demonstration. I knew that would pose no problem as far as the police were concerned. Due to their racism, whenever they heard shots on the point, they generally looked the other way. Once, during a dispute between two gangs, shooting broke out, and instead of police coming in to break it up, they sealed off the area and let them shoot it out. The gun battle lasted 24 hours, and the police didn't return until the next day. At around 8 o'clock, I saw David Hilliard's car driving up, which I found surprising because we had only seen each other a couple of times before. As the car approached, I recognized Emory Douglas and George Murray. Everyone had strange looks on their faces that made it clear that something was wrong. Damn, Huey had been shot and captured. He had shown up at David's wounded and bleeding heavily. There was real concern for his life, so David drove him to the hospital and left him on the steps, then drove straight to San Francisco to find me. He said Huey had asked him to ask me to help out in the aftermath, specifically dealing with the passenger who had been in Huey's car at the time of the shootout with Officer John Frey of the Oakland Police, who'd been killed. There was also the problem of the guns Huey had stockpiled. I'll never understand why David didn't just bring the guns with him, but he hadn't, and I was obliged to go back into the area, get everything, and get back out safely. That might sound easy, but the shootout had occurred less than 3 hours before, and there was one policeman dead and one seriously wounded, so it was hot over in Oakland, to say the least. There was no time to go by the house and unload the guns I had on hand for the training, so I followed David back to Oakland with a trunk full of weapons. David took me into the backyard of a house that had a lot of weeds and a stack of old lumber in which he had stashed the gun. In his state of excitement, he couldn't remember exactly where the pistol was, and while we were looking, an elderly black woman came out of the house next door and asked what we were doing. David kept searching and didn't look up. She then said, "If you don't come out of there, I'm going to call the police." I began to panic and told David to say something to the woman. When he rose up, she recognized him and calmed down. This was David's house, and she was his neighbor. On the one hand, I was relieved, but on the other, if the police were looking for the passenger who'd been with Huey, it was certain they wouldn't miss David's house, as both were known Panthers. Finally, he found the gun, and it continues from there.
Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Andy in Hoosick Falls, New York. Hey, Andy, what's up?
Hey, Tom. Calling about this latest police incident. You know, I drive a train for a living, and I've been doing it for 15 years. Mm-hmm. And we fall under the guidelines. And for me, it's passenger rail, right? So we're connected to the people.
So you're an Amtrak engineer.
And, yeah. Mm-hmm. So what happens is that when we're trained on the rules, but then we have these performance guidelines, which are set up by NASA. They're called situational awareness and technical proficiency, and they fall under the guidelines of what they call crew resource management. NASA came up with this, we adopted it, and basically my technical proficiencies are knowing the rules, knowing my equipment, knowing my physical characteristics of my territory. And then within crew resource management, you have situational awareness. It's foggy out, things like that, where the situations change. And they did this because of accidents, because of what I saw, like on television, right, with the police. For a police officer not to know the difference between a gun and a taser would be like me not knowing the difference between the throttle and the brake. It seems almost impossible that you could use that as an excuse. Like me, instead of braking, I throttle and crash. Seems impossible. Her technical proficiency is completely lost in this situation. And the situational awareness is like a domino effect. You don't just get to a situation like what happened. It usually is a compounding effect of situations where if you're aware of your situation, your situational awareness, you can de-escalate before it gets to that level. So that would be like me not being aware of, say, icy conditions and then continuing to just not pay attention to my surroundings. So she basically lost her situational awareness and her technical proficiency. And for somebody who's that many years in service, a representative of the union, seems impossible.
Yeah. I just, you know, and there were two other cops standing right with her as she's yelling taser, and they can both, I would think, see that she's holding a gun. Why doesn't one of them, like, knock the gun out of the way or say, no, that's your gun? Or it's just...
That falls under the crew resource management. I work with the crew myself, and we're all held equally responsible. so that if something is going wrong, somebody is trained to step in. That's part of crew resource management. I'm sure the police department is aware of these things. It comes out of NASA, and a lot of these agencies pick this stuff up.
Right, and this guy had a misdemeanor charge that he failed, which he failed to show up in court for, so they issued a warrant to bring him back to court. This is not this is not John Dillinger. This is not a guy that you use a taser on to begin with. It's just, it's amazing.
Exactly. The situation, they should have been aware of that situation so that it didn't domino into this. That falls within the situational awareness guidelines.
I'm with you. Andy, thank you for the call. David in Seattle. Hey, David, your thoughts?
Hello, Tom. Just a little while ago, I heard you saying that, we might be better off without the Republican death cult. Last week, I heard you say that what everyone says, we need a two-party system. My question is, do we need a two-party system if one of them are the Republicans?
My personal opinion on this is that the never-Trumpers within the GOP, and we're trying to get some of these folks on the program so we can have a conversation with them about it. Like, okay, if you need to reinvent the Republican Party, and maybe the Lisa Murkowski's, she voted to impeach Trump, and she stood up to him on a number of occasions, and in response to that, he's promised to go to Alaska and campaign against her in the primary. I think that these Republicans need to take back their political party. We need an opposition party. We need debate in this country. You can't just have one party just saying, this is the way it is, this is the way it's going to be. I know that that's what the Republicans have been fighting for and what they kind of achieved for a while during the Trump administration, but it's not a healthy thing for a democracy. You need to have debate. So, I am hopeful that we can get someplace with this. But it's not looking good. David, thank you for the call. Joyce in how do you say that town?
Cape Coral.
Cape Coral. 2 words. No wonder it doesn't look right. Okay. So what's up, Joyce?
Well, I'm actually a retired police officer, so I have a little bit of an insight as to guns and tasers, and I'm as much of a lost as you are as far as the last caller was totally correct about situational awareness. You have to know what's going on at all times. As far as the taser versus a gun, you carry it completely differently than you carry your gun, specifically to avoid that situation. You have muscle memory where you constantly grab your sidearm. You practice quick draw. You're constantly, you know exactly where your weapon is at all times, and you specifically carry your taser at a awkward or different angle to avoid that situation. Yeah. So how she managed to do that is absolutely beyond me.
Plus, she was not involved in the original altercation. She came from the back forward, so you would think that that situational awareness would be better for her than it would be for the two. Yeah. Right. Then it would be better for the two officers who are mixing it up with Dante Wright.
Yeah. She can observe, make an assessment, and then engage. So, and I don't know if she just completely panicked.
It seems like such a stretch to say, oh yeah, this cop just wanted to execute a black kid, because she's throwing away her career, she's throwing away her life by doing that, and she has to know that, especially while the Derek Floyd trial is going on. That's the one thing that gives me pause in just outright accusing her of trying to do an execution. But what else?
I get it. None of us there with that mentality. But, we have to be realistic, too. Is she? I don't know either. Are there some out there? Yeah.
I get that. Go ahead.
I think part of what will help is mandatory psychological evaluations as your career progresses. We all have them when we get hired. We need them throughout our career, because the job will change you as a person. And we need to have those psychological evaluations to find out if you are, as one of your callers mentioned, the female officer that used to soil herself before she got on duty.
Mm-hmm.
Go be a librarian.
Yeah, exactly. That person should not be a police officer.
No,
but then also we shouldn't be policing. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, I'm saying the psychological evaluations might catch those maybe good cops that are, I don't know, going down a bad road for whatever. Stop. Save them. Or weed out the ones that have no business being there in the first place.
Yeah,
one psychological evaluation at the beginning of your career is not going to cover you for the next 20.
No, and let's start changing the way that we do policing so that it's not such a grind. It's not such a terrible job. Police are called on to do so many different things that they really shouldn't be doing, and as a result, they find themselves in situations that really don't require. And I'm not talking about this situation specifically, but just as a grind you down kind of job, situations that don't require guns and police force. But anyway, Joyce, I got to move along. But thank you for the call and thanks for your insights. It's great to hear from a former police officer, Susie in Torrance, California. Hey, Susie, what's up?
Hi, yeah, and bless her. And the guy who drove the train, they're so right on. And part of that situational awareness is also understanding the community that you're policing, and understanding the fear level of somebody being pulled over, and her just coming from the back without any or enough interaction to understand why he might be frightened and run. That sense of not being listened to. I know I was assaulted by Redondo PD. What was I doing? Walking my 13-pound service dog.
Wow.
And on a Saturday afternoon, and I had said to the cop that that the person who likely called, and I called it right, had dementia and didn't remember an incident I wanted her to testify to, which was lies by a toxic manager in a HUD building for disabled and seniors. And she, she was hard of hearing. But also I wanted to call you out too on talking about the South, because I've been threatened by Klan actually in Connecticut in the 80s and in the Hamptons in the 90s for doing our trademark.
White supremacy is not unique to the South. You're absolutely right. And Tucker Carlson is not. I mean, Susie, thank you. I'm sorry, we're out of time.
Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Although the South did raise it to essentially the level of a religion for 100 years, and the lost cause lives on. 45 minutes past the hour. Lucretia in Los Angeles. Hey, Lucretia, thanks for listening to KPFK. What's up?
Hi, how are you? I find it glaring that, a lot of the focus now, as far as with the recent shooting in Minnesota, is focused on whether the female cop made a mistake of pulling a taser. But really the question is, what was he doing being pulled over in the first place? None of this would be happening if he wasn't being harassed over a pine tree.
Yep.
Hanging from his rear view.
Yeah, which I had no idea was illegal in Minneapolis, or in Minnesota, but apparently it is, technically anyway. Anything that obstructs your vision of your is. But really, I mean, they still sell these things in auto parts stores and
car washes.
Yeah.
That's my simple note.
Yeah, I'm completely with you, Lucretia, and that needs to be brought up more frequently too. Thank you. And which gets back to my point about the kind of policing that we're doing. Pauline in Los Angeles. Hey, Pauline, thanks for listening to KPFK. What's up?
Hi, Tom. Hi. I just wanted to know if you had heard of the SAM party, SAM. It's being started by David Jolly. He used to be a Republican congressman in Florida, and he talked about it about a month ago. It's pretty hard to start a party, but it's called Service to America Movement SAM Party. And it's for, independents or former Republicans or whatever, moderate Democrats, whoever. I think he wants to start it, one, because of the name Service to America, not Service to a Party. And also to be able to challenge Republicans across the country, because there's a lot of Republicans that have been completely, spoiled on the Democratic Party, right? They'll never vote Democratic because they've been conditioned to think as Democrats as, demons. They've demonized the Democratic Party. So anyways, I was wondering if you'd heard about that party, because I haven't really heard much about it, and you've not talked about it at all. So.
Yeah. I didn't know specifically about the SAM party, that he was trying to create a new party. I have heard him talk about Republicans, of goodwill need to be doing something. And Sean, I believe, has been talking to him about getting him on the program. We've been going through this list of Republicans who are never Trumpers who are in the media and trying to get one of them to come on the program. I don't know if they're afraid that I'm going to pick on them, because that's how I generally treat Republicans. But I'm actually looking for an honest conversation. And of course, I would ask about issues. I mean, the Republican Party has traditionally been opposed to Social Security and Medicare. Is your new party, is your new Republican Party? Now, by the way, I shouldn't say traditionally. Dwight Eisenhower was a big advocate of Social Security. Medicare didn't exist at the time. But Dwight Eisenhower was a big advocate of labor unions. The Republican Party changed with Reagan in a huge way, but are they going to try and reinvent it along Reagan lines, or are they going to go back to Eisenhower's Republican Party, which I think would be a reasonable and acceptable thing. So we're trying, Pauline. Thanks for the heads up on the SAM party, though. Yeah, thank you. Me too. I didn't know specifically about that. I appreciate the call. And thanks for listening to KPFK. We'll be back. We're coming up on 10 minutes before the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program. Stick around. Our 1-hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3-hour podcast available over at thomhartmann.com if you want to really support our program. So back in the day, and I mean back in the 1780s, literally, when the Constitutional Convention was happening in Philadelphia in the summer of 1787, there was this debate about the quality of the vote. Whether people who only landowners should be allowed to vote, stuff like that. And, in order to ensure that well-informed people who really care about voting are the only ones voting. It didn't pass. It was rejected by the framers of the Constitutional Convention, this idea that only landowners should be allowed to vote. Never made it in the Constitution. But a variation on this is now being proposed in the Arizona legislature. And State Representative John Kavanaugh, who's the chair of the committee that's pushing this legislation, says the quality of the vote is important. We have to look at the quality of votes as well. I've got a new video all about this for the supporters of our program over at thomhartmann.com. Check it out. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and Alvin in Greeley, Colorado. Hey, Alvin, you wanted to talk about the GOP?
Yes, hi, Tom. I wanted to talk about the Republican Party and how they have become completely antisocial, opposed to the common good. I mean, you basically named the issue, and if it's for the benefit of society, they will oppose it. A perfect example is guns. The American people want universal background checks, and Republicans are making it easier to buy guns. And Iowa just signed a law exempting handgun purchases from background checks from non-licensed sellers, so basically gun shows, private sellers. In Tennessee, they had a shooting yesterday. They just passed allowing concealed carry without permits in opposition to the law enforcement. They did not support that. They're opposed to the
So I'm with you, Alvin. We don't need to go through the list. What should we do?
Well, obviously voting out.
Yeah, that's step one.
I don't know why they're so antisocial. What's wrong with them?
Well, I think that there's a, this whole, own the libs and we're the bullies. I mean, basically, I think the GOP today is made up of the people who bullied you in elementary school and high school. That's it. And they are antisocial people to begin with. Alvin, excellent points all. Thank you. Bobby in Fort Mills, South Carolina says you're an ex-cop?
Yes, I am, Tom.
And decorated FBI, a federal agent, and a training officer. So, what are your thoughts on this shooting near Minneapolis?
Tom, I just cannot buy it. I mean, I'm familiar with firearms and the weight alone of the weapon she carried, a Glock and the Taser. It's just no way that you can mix up the two unless you just didn't care. Now, as I understand it, officers today wear the Taser on the weak side, but it's reversed, where you have to cross your arm to pull it. Of course, her strong arm is pulling that Glock. And when you pull that Glock, the first thing you see when you point it are two white dots on the sight. And she said, taser. Well, she was pointing that gun. The weight alone should have told her. I think she pulled that gun.
Yeah, plus you'd see that the gun is dark. It's typically black metal, and the Taser's bright yellow plastic.
And Joyce, the lady you spoke with, she was dead on. I just cannot believe it. And her length of time as a police officer, you just don't make mistakes like that. You just don't. I've met in recruiting. I've talked to a lot of young people in my day, and if they talk like one man said, well, I asked him if the man took a ham and ran away, would you shoot him? He said, yes, I would shoot him. I asked the question 3 times. Would you shoot a man running away with a ham? The reason why I asked him that is because this particular Christmas, it happened where I live. The guy stole a ham on Christmas Eve. They ran away, and the security guard shot him in the back. So I'm just saying, I just don't buy her story.
What's a life worth?
And I've recruited.
What's a life worth in America?
Yeah, I just can't buy her story. And I think that
I get it.
She, when I was an agent, supervisors would call you in every 30 days and talk with you about what you're doing. They would talk to your partners to find out what your mindset is, how you've been talking, and this and that. Because some of my work was covert, to be honest with you.
Mm-hmm.
And so they need to know what your mindset was. I think, and let me tell you something else, and I'll let you go. I've talked to many a cop. I walk into a 7-Eleven. I'll see them drinking coffee. I say hello to them. They act like they're scared to death to even speak to me. I am African-American, but they act like...
Just because you're black, you mean?
Well, no, I don't think it's that. I think because...
Or are you talking about walking in uniform?
No, they're in uniform. I'm walking in as
and you're
civilian.
Not.
But my point, Tom, is...
Right.
My point is this. In my day, we walked a beat. We got a chance to know the people. Cops in cars today do not have any interaction with the average citizen. They live in their scout cars, they talk to each other, and that's part of the problem.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. We had...
They don't even get out of the car to even engage an individual. And when they do, it's like cowboy heaven, like with the lieutenant. That should not have happened, Tom.
Yeah,
so that's all
I totally get it, Bobby, and I'm with you. Yeah, we had, a couple of years ago when we were talking about community policing, we had Officer Katie on the program, who's a Seattle cop who just walks a beat. That's all she does. I don't know if she still is, but it was such a refreshing, you get to know the people. Bobby, thank you. Thank you for the call, and thanks for sharing your expertise and experience with us. Thank you. It's honored and appreciated. We will be back. How many more Americans are going to die from COVID?
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More information at hellofresh.com, code TOM. CB Distillery for sleeping and pain relief. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. Annie's Kit Clubs, creativity delivered right to your door. More info is available at annieskitclubs.com/Tom. EasyFlow, personal air filtration system. Fresh air anywhere. More info at easyflowusa.com, code TOM. Masterclass with world-class instructors. More info at masterclass.com/Hartman. And Dinovite, only the best all-natural pet supplements. More info at dinovite.com.
We say fight back!
Our book today is Microtrends Squared by Mark Penn. The first chapter, The Building Blocks of Change Today, The Power of Microtrends. We live in a microtrends world. It's driven by granular, often opposite patterns of human behavior that seem small but punch above their size. We've identified these powerful patterns as microtrends, and the world is full of them. Together they are the dots of a global impressionist painting that comes to life when you step back and look at it holistically. These forces have only become more impactful in recent years, and they've started to upend society. 10 years ago, when I first identified these patterns in change and microtrends, I saw a world of boundless opportunities. I was over-the-top optimistic about how microtrends would produce a new world of personalized products on our shelf, and how in Washington they would produce an even greater selection of fresh, first-rate political choices. Of course, that's not exactly what happened. Instead, the information age has given way to the disinformation age, in which fake information abounds. The nation founded on free speech is grappling with how to live with free speech in the era of the internet troll. The optimism around our economy faded with the unexpected crash of 2008, followed by a historically slow recovery over a decade. Only now is it recovering. Unparalleled consumer choice is leading not to the growth of more startups, but to the dominance of just a few internet companies, which are amassing more and more power on the basis of data gleaned from willing but unknowing consumers. And the older generations, who in their own youth led a rebellion, have now dug in their heels against the politics and culture of today's new generations. What makes the microtrend such a powerful tool in this moment is that it can unpack and explain changes that we're seeing that otherwise make no sense. On the surface, for example, the middle class can seem to be shrinking, and this is alarming. But it is only by digging deeper and seeing that education is driving more people into the upper classes that we can come to understand these overall statistics at a more molecular level. Often, two diametrically opposed trends are occurring at the same time, which would be invisible in the averages, but which leap out when understood as the result of a cauldron of microtrends. Today in politics, for example, there is no overall ideological shift. Instead, one group of moderates became more conservative and another group became more liberal, causing society to become both more liberal and more conservative at the same time, essentially canceling each other out. This increased polarization then produces even more gridlock and confusion. We can see similar tugs and pulls throughout society. While one group seeks more technology, another one wants to sit in the Amtrak quiet car. Some can't sit through a 6-second commercial. Others spend hours and hours binge-watching TV. Some live in a world of globalization, while others yearn for a return to greater nationalism. To explain all this, we've borrowed from Newtonian physics. For every trend, there is a counter-trend. It's human nature in the information age. Every move or desire in one direction seems to inspire a counter-move by another group in the opposite direction. For every radical group, there's a new conservative group. For every new product in mobile technology, there are those sticking to the flip phone. Only by understanding the complexity of these developments can we make sense of a world that seems senseless, confused, and even jumbled. While in 2007, microtrends allowed you to navigate the changes of the day, now microtrends squared lets you better understand the emerging chaos as the seesawing of opposite forces fighting for dominance in the social, political, and cultural worlds. In the last decade, technology was able to exploit and even conquer the world of microtrends with its ability to customize products and our lives based on AI and big data. But even as these attempts have transformed our lifestyles, they've also led to some serious unintended consequences that have further clouded society. Microtrends disentangles many of these shifts and lies at the source of many battles for power that have disrupted our world today. As you'll see throughout this book, those ongoing battles will result in some very unlikely winners, losers, and shifts in the overall power match of society. While the technology behind increased personalization of goods and services has been providing us with more choice in our daily life, we've instead been making fewer choices, burrowing into comfortable silos. We expected that the advances in our ability to customize goods and services would open us all up to a new world of never-ending experimentation. A decade later, exactly the opposite has occurred, and our society has become increasingly polarized, with people finding choices they like and picking them over and over again. In 2007, microtrends explained how the Starbucks economy had succeeded the Ford economy. In the Ford economy, you could have any color you wanted as long as it was black. The aim of industry was to mass-produce products at the lowest possible cost, and that meant standardization of goods. But the new economy of the 21st century was moving starkly away from that model, instead providing consumers with any color they wanted. The Starbucks economy was based on creating greater value through customization, even of simple products like coffee and tea. People everywhere became more individualistic in their tastes and were rebelling from carefully mowed lawns and white picket fences. The marketplace responded to these trends by allowing people to have it their own way, and they did. The theory was that more choice would result in a happier and more satisfied group of consumers. Variety would open consumers up to new experiences, in many ways bringing us closer together, allowing us to mix, match, and try out all sorts of new options. Something rather surprising happened, however, as consumers got more choice. The book Microtrends Squared.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
So how much is the GOP's vaccine denialism and doubt spreading and all this kind of stuff going to cost us? How much damage is it going to do to America? Which takes me back to my first hour topic, which was, that the Republican Party is no longer a legitimate party. 54 Resistance actually just tweeted in response to a troll who was responding to my post. He said, not sure he's trying to ban it, just for people to be vocal and saying that Trump's Republican Party isn't legitimate, and it isn't. Less than a quarter of Americans identify as Republican, which is true. And vaccine refusal, over at Daily Co's Dartigan community posted, vaccine refusal is going to cost this country billions, and who's going to pay for it? Is it going to be these guys who are running around going, well, I don't know, I have some doubts, or hey, there's baby parts in that vaccine, or which are all lies, obviously, or hey, it's just like the flu. Right, the flu doesn't disable 30% of all the people who have it for at least 6 months, which is what is happening with COVID. Just the rehabilitation costs of this country already are in the billions, the tens of billions. Our medical costs in the billions. Reagan's answer to a demand for some sort of help with medical expenses back in the 80s was Congress passing a law, I think it was in 86, that said that if you show up at a hospital emergency room, they can no longer turn you away. Hospital emergency rooms would just routinely turn away poor people. Car accidents, strokes, heart attacks, whatever it may be. If you showed up at a hospital ER and you didn't have insurance, you didn't have money, or particularly if you were black and you didn't have money or insurance, you just literally got physically turned away, thrown out on the street. And so in the 80s, they passed this law saying that, ERs can't turn you away. So now we've got all these people with COVID showing up in ERs, and who's paying the bill? You and me. It's jacking up our insurance prices. It's raising the cost of hospitalization. It's raising the cost of everything, every piece of this. And now the vaccine refusal. I mean, this isn't just one variable. It isn't just how much we're going to extra pay in our insurance premiums and Medicare premiums and things like that. It's also, how much it's costing us in lost productivity. You want the economy to get back to full speed? I mean, I think we would all like that. Certainly Joe Biden would like that. There's no way the economy is going to go back to full capacity if 40% of Republicans, 20% of what we've got right now, somewhere in the neighborhood actually of around almost 40% of Americans saying, I don't know, I have some doubts. And this is spreading, this meme is spreading like wildfire through Facebook and other social media. And now, of course, the Johnson & Johnson vaccine being put on pause because there are 6 cases of people, of young women under 50 getting, I believe maybe even under 40, I think though it was under 49, getting blood clots, 6 out of 10, over 10 million people who've gotten the vaccine. But still, hey, caution is good. But it's just like one more talking point for the nervous Nellies. I'm worried about this. I don't know about this. Jay Inslee, the governor of Washington State, said these people will be foisting their costs on the rest of the community with their refusal to get vaccinated. He says he's seen it right now in Washington State, where so far 300,000 people have been contacted by the state and offered a vaccine and explicitly said no. 300,000 people. That's 300,000 people who are going to be disease vectors. That's 300,000 people who are going to be disabled. That's 300,000 people who are going to be on Social Security disability that you and I are paying for, that's going to damage the Social Security Trust Fund. And, Republicans are trying to make the situation worse. You've got half the Republican caucus, half of the Republicans in Congress refusing to even say if they've been vaccinated, and a good chunk of them proudly saying, no, I haven't been vaccinated. Rand Paul, Ron Johnson, I don't need a vaccine. Greg Abbott down in Texas and Ron DeSantis in Florida saying, we're going to make it illegal to use vaccine passports. Businesses, we never interfere in businesses, except now. Businesses cannot require people to show proof of vaccination, to get on a cruise ship, to get on an airplane, to go into a restaurant, to patronize a bar. Really? This is the hill you guys want to die on? Well, yeah, and the reason why is quite clear. And I don't know why the media does not point this out. If the GOP can prevent people from getting vaccinated, then we will not get out of this mess. And if we don't get out of this mess, if the economy doesn't improve, then Democrats are going to have a harder time getting elected and reelected next year in the election. And if they can hold it off for 4 years, or 3.5 more years, three more years, 3.5 more years, then Joe Biden will have a difficult time getting reelected, or Kamala Harris filling his shoes. This is their long game. I don't understand why nobody is pointing this out. Or am I just nuts? Am I like, somehow way out on the fringe here saying, it looks to me like this is intentional. That Republicans in Congress refusing to say that they got vaccinated, trashing vaccines like, Rand Paul and Ron Johnson are doing, spreading vaccine misinformation. That they're just, what, do you think they're just doing this for fun? You think they're just doing it because they're congenital contrarians? I don't think so. They're doing it for a reason. So what would the reason be? Well, when Trump was president, there was a very clear reason. He wanted the economy to be humming again in spite of the pandemic. We did not have vaccines then. And so the only thing he could do if he wanted to get the economy back to work was to tell people, don't take time off. Go back to work and get back into the stores. Quit ordering from Amazon. Show up in your local store. Show up in your local restaurant. Show up in your local bar. Remember him tweeting, reopen Michigan, hashtag, reopen Wisconsin, going after states that have Democratic governors? This is political strategy. This is the Republican Party. Trump, leading up to the election, was trying to get more people infected so he could have so-called herd immunity and so that he could have his economy working because he knew that he would lose the election if the economy failed. But then after the election, the Republicans continued pushing this and added vaccine reluctance or hesitancy to their menu. Why? Because they saw that doing it prior to the election actually sabotaged Trump, lost them the House, lost them the Senate, cost Republican candidates votes. And so if they can continue that exact same thing, it will sabotage whoever's in power now, which, by the way, if you haven't noticed, is the Democrats. They control the House, the Senate, and the White House. And, we can even get the Supreme Court in on the act, say the Republicans. Let's toss this to Amy Coney Barrett. We want to have, out in California, we would like people to be able to have prayer groups in their homes. Unvaccinated prayer groups in their homes. What could possibly go wrong? And the Supreme Court ruled yesterday or the day before that, I guess it was yesterday, that it's just fine. No limits. The state can't regulate prayer groups. So what's next? Churches, of course. I mean, they've been going for this, let's expand the rights of religion thing for when it comes to discriminating against black people, when it comes to discriminating against, non-gender conforming people, gay people, LGBTQ, trans people. This is like their brand. And now the Supreme Court is in on the act with Kavanaugh and Gorsuch and Clarence Thomas just enthusiastically going along. The one guy who wasn't with them was John Roberts, weirdly enough. So how much is this vaccine refusal going to cost us? When is the American media going to start calling the GOP out for what they are doing here, for this naked political move? We'll be back with your calls right after this. Stick around.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
15 minutes past the hour. Occupying the media 3 hours a day, 5 days a week, right here. We'll be back with your calls in just a minute. And welcome back. Let's see here. Kevin in Terre Haute, Indiana. Hey, Kevin, what's up?
Hey, this is about the police shootings. I think that in every county in America, the police, the sheriff, and any of the state police in that county, if there's a shooting, they ought to have to put in a pool $1,000 each time there's a shooting, and out of their income they lose that money, and they can't have no police donations for that money. This way you force the police agencies to police themselves. If there's a shooting, if it's justified or something like that, there would still be some amount of limit that each one of them would lose, because look, if you are shooting people, there's a problem, and, even if it's justified, you still have to have some repentance for the public, if you have people that cops can shoot people, you ought to have a pool where if I'm going to lose money in this pool, I'm a police officer, then I'm going to, after a couple of shootings, I want to have everybody there that this is the procedures that we are going to abide by, because I'm not willing to lose my money or my family's money because of reckless shootings of other officers. And, let the police police themselves.
Kevin, I get it. Let me just toss an idea out to you. The whole $1,000 in fees and, it's almost too much like, if you kill somebody, this is what it's going to cost you. Why not treat cops like we do doctors? Doctors hold your life in their hands. They can kill you with a scalpel just as easily as they can heal you. And sometimes they do kill people. And what we do is we say, if a doctor kills you, you can sue that doctor. You can take him for everything he's got. You can wipe him out for the rest of his life. Or he can buy malpractice insurance. But hey, if he's been sued, he's not going to easily find that malpractice insurance in the future. Why not just do that? Why not just do away with this whole qualified immunity thing?
Well, they shouldn't have immunity because the police never grant, or the state legislatures never grant us immunity. I live in Terre Haute, and our biggest thing that we built now is a jail in order to conduct state legislatures' law. And state legislatures has all the power over all the police agencies. And if we hold the police agencies responsible for their actions, we should also hold the state legislature responsible for their action. Here's an idea, Tom. Why not have, I call this the Kevin law, where for 5 years, each law that a state legislature passes, you have to have improvements each year. And at the end of the 5 years, if they haven't made vast improvements, then that law after 5 years cannot be a law. It's kind of like like a pilot program.
Yeah. Well, a lot of that's going to depend on state constitutions and things like that, Kevin. But it seems like just a straightforward. If you want accountability, holding individuals accountable seems like a good place to start. Kevin, great rant. Thank you very much for the call. We'll be back with more of your calls in just a moment. Coming up on 20 minutes past the hour. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. So David Perry over at Medium.com put together a list of 38 reasons to investigate the Trump administration. Everything from the Russian influence over the 2016 election, to the Trump family's collusion with Russia, to Ivanka Trump's trademarks, to federal spending at Trump properties, to the civilians killed by Trump's drone strikes, to the Trump administration's role in turning the United States into the global epicenter for the COVID-19 pandemic. Yes, we are. Yes, it's grim. Their decision to sideline the CDC, politicizing mask wearing just to try to get himself reelected, the number of people who died because the White House kept PPE from blue states, from Democratic-led states, the contents of the Trump documents that Trump refused to release to the House Judiciary Committee and other committees, all the people who wouldn't speak, at all, ignoring subpoenas, violations of the Hatch Act, the deportation of COVID-positive immigrant families, illegal altering of records. Anyhow, there's a whole list. It's over at ThomHartmann.com. Check it out. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. I mean, this is, I'm not sure that this is another dimension of it. I think the media thinks this is another dimension, this whole vaccine refusal thing being tied in with toxic masculinity and the whole, cult of, I'm the big man, I'm a Trump boy. Senator Rick Scott, gave Donald Trump his participation award, this little bowl that kind of looked like the third place in a golf trophy. And but you know, Trump has got people absolutely cowed. He's got donors, he's got Republican office holders, and increasingly, they're buying into Trump's lies. I mean, and this is incredible. CPAC, the Conservative Political Action Conference, 68% of people wanted him to seek another term. 95% want him to advance his policies and agendas. Well, what were his policies? Demonizing people of color, making racist comments, denigrating women, highlighting, holding up, valuing misogyny, and giving tax cuts to billionaires and big corporations. That's literally all he did. Well, in deregulating industry, the first piece of legislation that he signed allowed coal companies in West Virginia to start dumping, or all over the country actually, to start dumping mining waste poison into local rivers so that they can poison downriver water supplies, but they can increase their profits. 95% of all the people at CPAC want him to continue this? Want the Republican Party to continue this? I mean, where do these folks come from? Anyway, there's a lot on our plate. Let's pick up some phone calls here. Angelo in Chicago. Hey, Angelo, what's up? Angelo? I am not hearing Angelo. I don't know if I have a latency problem or if there's a phone problem. So let's try James in Chicago. Hey, James, can you hear me?
Hey, Tom, I can hear you fine. Can you hear me?
Great. Yes, sir. Okay, what's on your mind?
I got 2 points I want to make, Tom. Number one, along with what you and the callers were saying about the police officer, that officer has over 20 years experience, and initially she was about 8 feet away from the other two officers. Now, I'm going to tell you what I think. Now, I don't want to say that she was doing an execution type thing, but I think that with this Floyd Chauvin trial going on, she needed an out, and by being on the camera, on yelling taser, taser, it sounds like I got a taser in my hand. I'm announcing that I have a taser. And that's what I do. I don't think that she felt she had a taser in her hand. I think that the incident blew out of proportion, and so she shot the man. You know, and I want to make a point on George Floyd too after this one. But that is my feeling on that one, Tom. On the Floyd thing, here's my question. If I'm not mistaken, Chauvin is the defendant, unless I'm mistaken. So
not today.
Why?
Apparently, the new strategy for the defense is to make George Floyd the defendant.
That's my point. That's my point, Tom. Why is it that when the prosecution wanted to bring up Chauvin's past transgressions, the judge would not allow them to do it? Now, this man is the defendant, but now they're going to do everything they can bringing up Floyd's past transgressions, and I haven't started watching the trial yet, but if the judge is allowing this to happen, my question is why, considering the fact that the defendant is Chauvin and not Floyd?
Well, part of it is that this is the way they've always done it. You know, when a cop kills someone, you've got to start parading every last terrible thing about that person's life. You know, even small mistakes out in front of the jury to justify the cop killing them. So this is always the way they've always done it. I didn't watch enough of it today. A lot of it was preempted by the funeral, and so I can't tell you exactly. What I did watch was very clearly the defense lawyer trying to put George Floyd on trial, which is an old strategy. The question, I guess, the larger question, James, is whether this strategy is still going to work, or whether its day has passed. And I'm inclined to think its day has passed, but we'll find out. James, I got to move along, but thank you for the call. Carol in Menneson, Pennsylvania. Hey, Carol, what's up?
Hi, Tom. In regard to the Dante Wright killing, I have a question that's been puzzling me right along. Pardon me. When I first saw the video, a very large cop was handcuffing Mr. Wright, and Mr. Wright looked like a very slightly built man. And then I assume he was put in the car after he was handcuffed. And my concern and my question is, why did she run in and feel the need to tase a handcuffed man sitting, pardon me, my allergies are up, sitting in his car? handcuffed. Why would you even want to tase him? And why didn't she let that officer that did the original arrest take over after he handcuffed him? Why did she come running in? I don't understand.
There was two cops on either side of him. I don't understand it either, Carol. And the other two cops seemed like they had it under control. Yes, he kind of fell back into the chair, into the seat after he was handcuffed, but he was friggin' handcuffed. I mean, what are you going to do at that point? Yeah,
why would she feel the need to tase him at all?
Right. I don't get it either. And in fact, the police manual says that you don't tase somebody when they're sitting in the driver's seat of a car because the car might lurch off, which, by the way, is exactly what happened. Yep. Carol, thank you. Thank you for the call. Yep, there you go. We'll be back. Coming up on 28 minutes past the hour.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
It's talk media for the sane among us, the Thom Hartmann Program. We'll be back with more of your calls right after this. We're going to check in with Debbie Hines in about 20 minutes with you. Our book for the book report today. Is Taking Bullets, Terrorism and Black Life in 21st Century America, Confronting White Nationalism, Supremacy, Privilege, Plutocracy, and Oligarchy, a Poet's Representation and Challenge by Haki R. Madhuburi. He writes, this is from the chapter, page 27, the chapter Terror in the Midst of Prayer and Empire. In our perpetual state of national mourning, where our eyes are watered out and our hearts cease to heal at the rate the Creator meant them to, we hold hands in profound silence as we remember the Mother Emanuel 9 of Charleston, South Carolina, those 9 mothers, fathers, sisters, and brothers. Even before burying, before black earth covered their caskets, too many ministers, media pundits, and plain white and black folks downgraded the terror that quickened their deaths of our finest in this land to the mental illness and race hatred, in quotes, of a single young white man. He may have acted alone, but he was not alone in his thinking, encouragement, gathering of arms, warped consciousness, confirmation, or ahistorical views, and yeses from the millions in the nation who proudly wear and display the Confederate flag above their hearts and fly it in all of its traitorous glory over a state capitol and other institutions. Again, we find ourselves at war with history and culture, entertaining another call for a national conversation on race and a president weary of trying to make sense of and comfort the grief-stricken nation with words from the highest office of the land. This was written while Obama was president. These are the facts, not an opinion or the ignorant ranting of compromised preachers and television pundits. A 21-year-old white man, a citizen of South Carolina, walked into the sacred and spiritual home of the Emmanuel African Methodist Episcopal Church of Charleston, the historic home of black liberation fighter Denmark Vesey, and fatally killed 9 of its members, including the pastor, during Bible study. This was a pure act of domestic terrorism. A modern-day lynching by a young white nationalist who coolly and calmly assassinated 9 black members of Mother Emanuel. Domestic violence and acts of terrorism are on the rise in the United States, as detailed by Charles Kurzman and Daniel Schanzer in their New York Times op-ed, The Other Threat, where they state that, quote, the main terrorist threat in the United States is not from violent Muslim extremists, but from right-wing extremists, end quote. In their national research, local police agencies across the country identified, quote, the militias, neo-Nazis, and sovereign citizens as the major threat the nation faces in regard to extremism, end quote. All of this is homegrown with international connections. Morris Dees and J. Richard Cohen of the Southern Poverty Law Center also writes in the New York Times article, Racists Without Borders, that, quote, Americans tend to view attacks like the mass murder in Charleston as isolated hate crimes, the work of a deranged racist or a group of zealots lashing out in anger unconnected to a broader movement. This view we can no longer afford to indulge. When, according to survivors, Mr. Roof told the victims at the prayer meeting that black people were, quote, taking over the country, he was expressing sentiments that unite white nationalists from the United States and Canada to Europe, Australia, and New Zealand. Unlike those of the civil rights era, whose main goal was to maintain Jim Crow in the American South. Today's white supremacists don't see borders. They see a white tribe under attack by people of color across the globe. The end of white rule in Rhodesia, now Zimbabwe, and South Africa, they believe, foreshadowed an apocalyptic future for all white people, a white genocide that must be stopped before it's too late. End of quote. The internationalization of terrorism is not a foreign theory in today's social media world. Dees and Cohen will be speaking at a conference in Budapest about this transnational white supremacism that is emerging as the world grows more connected technologically. The message of white genocide is spreading. Also, David J. Whitaker's Terrorism, Understanding the Global Threat, gives another view. Clearly, our rush to forgive this mass murderer within 96 hours of this supreme tragedy is misguided, anti-human, and does not allow for properly grieving the fallen. As perfectly scripted, displaying the permanent effectiveness of Christian acculturation on the Sunday, June 21st, 2015 morning services of Mother Emanuel Church, the black Christians out-Christianed their white brothers and sisters. Before the morning sermon, the presiding elder, Reverend Norvell Goff Sr., found it necessary to thank the local, state, and federal law enforcement agencies for doing their job. He also stated, quote, "A lot of folks expected us to do something strange and break out in a riot. Well, they just don't know us. We are people of faith," end quote. I find this statement inappropriate, insensitive, and ahistorical, implying, whether he meant it or not, that the recent uprising and rebellions in Ferguson, New York, Cleveland, and other parts of the nation were riots and did not include black people of faith, and that somehow they were strange in their social, political, and economic activism. Informed people do not riot against injustice or white terrorism. They study, organize, and strategically struggle at all levels, in the streets, on the campus, in front of the White House, and in corporate boardrooms. Dylan Roof stated his stated intentions were to start a race war, and informed black leadership understands that we cannot pray this away or appeal to any law enforcement agency that all across the country, including Charleston, has been seriously compromised. To label black reaction to murder, terrorism, deep unemployment, substandard housing, etc., as riot is to blame the victim. The book, Taking Bullets. Recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3-hour podcast available over at thomhartmann.com if you want to really support our program. Welcome back. 34 minutes past the hour. Thom Hartmann here with you. Rick in Monterey Park, California. Hey, Rick, what's on your mind?
Hi, Tom. Earlier you were talking about the need to maintain a two-party system, but changing it up. Mm-hmm. And I think something like a mainstream Democrat, what's called a mainstream Democratic Party today, and a progressive party would be a nice balance.
Wow. That makes perfect sense.
Or an Eisenhower Republican Party and a progressive Democratic Party. But
that's what I was thinking of, because, the Democrats back during the Eisenhower era were, outside of the Dixiecrats, the racist strain in the Democratic Party, they were generally a little more progressive. And so I figured, turn the Republican Party back into a progressive party. But if the Joe Manchin wing of the Democratic Party, the semi-rational Democrats, but they just still want to be basically the party of big business and billionaires. They're just not willing to destroy America to get there. If that group was to say, okay, we're now the Democratic Party, and then the progressives in the Democratic Party were to start a progressive party, or some variation on that theme. That's interesting. Let me ponder that for a few days and get back with you. But Rick, thanks. That's a brilliant idea. Fascinating. Dan in Altoona, Pennsylvania. Hey, Dan, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. How's it going today?
Good. What's up?
Good. Well, I wanted to talk about J&J pulling their vaccine after 6 cases of blood clots in the ladies. And I am a moderator of a few Facebook COVID groups, and I have seen a very, very disturbing trend when it comes to anti-vaxxing over the past few days. And we've had a lot of people that were very hesitant of the vaccines in the group, because I'm from a rural area in Pennsylvania, and this just solidified it. So we're already spiking in the area, and I don't think it's going to get any better.
Yeah. And, it's easy to say, Well, 6 people with blood clots, 1 dead as a result of 6.5 or 7 million shots. Let me tell you what guns do. I mean, we're going to ban this vaccine because of 6 people dead. But, it is kind of an apples and oranges comparison. That was my concern, Dan. As soon as they said that, I thought that what they should have done was like Europe did with AstraZeneca. It appears the exact same mechanism is at work there. There are commonalities. These are pre-menopause women who have low platelets, low red blood cells as part of a medical condition. And so you would not expect them to have clotting problems. And, there's speculation about whether the low platelets or platelets is what triggers this somehow. Platelets, thank you, Sean, is what triggers this. But whatever. I mean, that this is going to make people hysterical, and it shouldn't make people hysterical. And like with AstraZeneca, they're still giving that vaccine to people over 40. Actually, I think it's over 50 now in Europe, and to younger men, because this seems to have a tie to estrogen. But it's very unfortunate. It's very unfortunate, Dan.
Yep, and I also wanted to point out that it also goes into what you were saying about the Republican Party trying to sabotage Joe Biden, and I think this is also going to help that cause because we're a purple state, and his approval rating around here is not good now, and it's not going to be good after this vaccine gets old. It's just sad.
Yeah, that's very unfortunate. Dan, thanks for the call, and thanks for the heads up on that. Jerry in Baltimore, Maryland. Hey, Jerry, what's up?
Hi, Tom. I wanted to talk to you about a campaign that would maybe be against the anti-vaxxers. It might be pretty productive for the Democrats to put in place. I think we need to showcase like Times Square like they did before, and also all these billboards, especially in the rural areas of the country, but pretty much all over the United States, and a complete campaign with commercials on television and everything else. With the GOP leaders, I would say the GOP doesn't care one bit about you. However, they do care about themselves. And then just showcase how these hypocrites were all first in line to get these vaccines. They even jumped the line, a lot of them, and that they, including some of the hosts of Fox. And I think that we should push these hashtags, hashtag GOP Death of Democracy, these are some I came up with myself, hashtag GOP Genocide, hashtag GOP Party of Death, hashtag GOP Pro-Death. They say they're the pro-life party, but they're actually the pro-death party, and they've showed that every which way you look.
Yeah, I think we need to start saying this out loud. 500,000 dead Americans was literally part of Donald Trump's reelection strategy. Another 500,000 dead Americans is literally part of the Republican get us reelected strategy, going forward.
Right.
This,
I agree. I started my hashtags back last year and last April when I saw what they were doing. I saw it as a genocide over a year ago. I think it's quite evident. They just want to kill off anyone who is not going to be one of their voters. And also, I think that there's a mistake being made by the commentators on some of the news stations when they say it's just blocking the African-American and people of color vote. No, in Georgia, they want to overturn all pretty much people who vote Democratic in some of those urban city areas. So it's also, I think people need to realize that it's going to affect white voters as well. So I think if they would include that in some of their commentaries, they might even get more support, because Democratic voters in general are going to be screwed over.
Yeah, and they're right. Yep, Jerry, all excellent points. Thank you. Thank you so much for making them. Tony in Fort Worth, Texas. Hey, Tony, what's up?
Hi, Tom. Thanks for taking my call. I'm in line with everyone else that's agreeing this incident with in Minnesota, Minneapolis. That was not an accident, because if you've been doing this job 26 years, it's a force of habit, and that's the scary part. She's not used to reaching for a taser. She's used to reaching for a gun. That's, when you're trained in the academy, that's your first instinct. Go for your weapon. When I was a deputy sheriff years ago, our first instinct was to reach for the baton that was on our weak side. So that was always my first instinct. Reach for the baton. If that didn't work, you reach for the gun. Her first instinct was reach for the gun for whatever reason. And then when she realized what she had done, she just started yelling, taser, 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 because like everyone else has said, tasers are a different color. They're lighter. They have a different feel because they're plastic. There's no way you can mistake a gun for a taser.
Yeah, it's apples and oranges. This police officer just resigned, by the way. That's the breaking news over at the Washington Post website, that she just submitted her letter of recommendation, or letter of resignation, excuse me. Tony, thank you. Thank you for your experience as a police officer, too. I appreciate it. John in West Allis, Wisconsin. Hey, John, what's up?
Hey, thanks, Tom. Your rant about the Republican Party is spot on. Even during the 2020 election, their only real platform was re-elect Trump. And for quite some time now, their only policy has been win or retain power at all costs, no matter what you have to do. Their major program has been the only thing that Trump really accomplished in 4 years: give trillions away to billionaires and the big corporations. And their principle is wreck the government and try to blame the Democrats. So something's got to happen. Biden can't. How can you possibly compromise with that?
Yeah, no, I'm completely with you, John. And I just what baffles me is why the media won't call this out. Why commentators, for that matter, are not just saying out loud what I'm saying out loud. I don't think it would be controversial. Dylan in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Dylan, you're on the air.
Hey, Tom. I want to talk about responsibility. No matter where you stand on gun rights, when you are given the responsibility to carry a weapon of war, whether you be a cop or a regular citizen, you have the liability of whatever happens between you and that gun. And until we realize that, until people are held accountable for their actions as being a person with a gun, then this is going to continue to happen, and it's just tiring. And we hear about it nonstop, as you well know. And I'm sick and tired of it, just hearing about this and no one getting in trouble about it. It's ridiculous.
Yeah. Yeah, or people at least should have the responsibility, right? I mean, police officers generally don't. They're not held responsible. This is the 9th case of a police officer claiming that they pulled their taser when they pulled a gun and shot and killed somebody that the New York Times documented this morning. None of these people went to jail. And we're still not talking about malpractice insurance for cops. We're not talking about doing away with qualified immunity for cops. I realize that there is legislation that has passed the House that is heading to the Senate. It's called the George Floyd Responsibility in Policing Act, I believe, or maybe it's liability and I think it's responsibility in policing. That will solve some of these problems. Good luck getting it through the Senate as long as there's a filibuster. But, maybe, I mean, this might be the thing that'll even push some of, the cinemas and the mansions of the world. Dylan, I got to run, but thank you for the call. And I appreciate your comments. It's 45 minutes past the hour. It's the Thom Hartmann Program. We'll be back with more of your calls in just a moment. Oh, and we're going to check in with Debbie Hines in about 5 minutes and find out what's going on in the Chauvin trial. Our legal analyst, she will break it down for us. Former Assistant Attorney General for Maryland as well. Stick around.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
It is 45 minutes past the hour. It's your media support group for We the People. And welcome back, Wayne in Eugene, Oregon. Hey, Wayne, what's on your mind?
Well, a couple of years ago, Tom, I did a little informal research on, these cop killings, and what I tried to check on was whether returning combat vets with PTSD were part of the problem. And what I found out, was that
As
PTSD
in
is
returning
rampant.
combat vets becoming cops, or returning combat vets triggering cops?
No, becoming cops.
Okay, got
And
it.
what I found out was that wasn't a factor, the returning vets, but PTSD is rampant in all police. And that makes sense. I was a paramedic in ER and ICU tech for many years, and the constant alertness, you're on constant fight or flight, basically, chemicals, because you're constantly alert for something bad to happen. And it takes its toll, and it causes PTSD. And when you see a trained veteran cop shoot somebody because he's scared to death of him and afraid for his life, and the person is unarmed and running away from him, something's wrong there. And that strikes me as PTSD, really.
Yeah. Could be, and that that actually makes a lot of sense, and that's why we need to be changing the nature of policing. And I mean, there's, as I've said before, there are a lot of things that cops do that shouldn't be done by cops, and the things that cops do, there should be greater oversight, there should be greater liability and responsibility, there should be accountability, there should be financial, legal, political, all the whole spectrum, and we need to stop having policing be a partisan issue. We've got the Republican Party that's like totally down with killer cops, and the Democratic Party saying, hey, wait a minute. And that's crazy. I mean, of course, the Republican Party doesn't stand for anything that is all American. They're just all about brutality and fascism. But it's still friggin' crazy. Wayne, thank you. Well said. Grant in Ventura, California. Hey, Grant, what's up?
Yes, Tom, I'd like to talk about law enforcement's problem with steroid use. As high as 1 in 5 police are on steroids. They even have police seminars about the steroidal epidemic in law enforcement and the signs and symptoms of steroid. Yeah, the signs and symptoms of steroid use are sleep deprivation, fight-flight syndrome, paranoia, poor impulse control, impulsive violent episodes, to the point where police, 5 times the number of domestic violence incidents are in the police.
Right. Which raises a question, Grant. Is that because people who would be violent in a domestic situation are drawn to policing, or because people who are within policing are exposed to so much violence and such a violent culture that they're more likely to go home and beat up their family?
Well, they've shown that steroid use just intensifies all that. And a lot of the police are on steroids. And so when you see these traffic stops escalate to violence, maybe the police are on steroids, but police unions don't ask the police to normally take drug tests. I
got to run, Grant. But whatever the cops who took down that Army lieutenant, were on, they shouldn't be on. We need to get control of that. We'll be back. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. So people wonder, why militias all of a sudden? How is it that all kinds of Americans are showing up with assault weapons in the Capitol building, trying to assassinate the Vice President of the United States and the Speaker of the House of Representatives, and stop the counting of the presidential votes, the Electoral College votes? Where did this come from? The last time we saw an armed uprising against the federal government in the United States was 1861. It was the Confederacy. Is this a Confederacy rising again? Well, yeah, there is a huge white supremacist element to it. In fact, I'd say it's one of the primary animating impulses. But what really got these things going, these militias going, was the Heller decision written by the opinion written by Anthony Scalia and published on June 26, 2008. And it has crazy language in it, basically begging for militias. I share it with you in a special video over at ThomHartmann.com. Check it out. And welcome back. Debbie Hines is on the line with us. She is our trial lawyer, she is a trial lawyer. She is our analyst for the Chauvin trial, legal political commentator, former prosecutor, served as the Assistant Attorney General for the state of Maryland early in her career. IamDebbieHines.com is her both her Twitter handle, or IamDebbieHines is both her Twitter handle and .com is her website. Debbie, welcome back. So it looked, from the little I saw of the trial this morning, like they're now going to try and put George Floyd on trial now that the defense has taken their turn.
Oh, that's what they've been trying to really do all along. I mean, that's really the only thing that the defense has going to in any way try to refute what we all saw in the 9-minute, 29-second video. So today they start with a prior arrest that Mr. Floyd had a year before his death in 2019. And even though the judge instructed the jury that it's only for a limited purpose and it's not for the purpose of, to defame Mr. Floyd's character, yeah, well, that was really the reason for it. So they had an officer who arrested him in 2019, and they also had the paramedic that, they came to the scene in 2019, the year before. But, all the witnesses today, including those two, are really more helpful for the prosecution than really for the defense, because, what happened in 2019, he lived to see another day. He lived to see a whole nother year until he met up with Derek Chauvin with his knee on his neck. So anything that they're trying to say that, oh, he had drugs in his system, he had this, he had that, it really doesn't matter, because we're not back at 2019. We're at May 25th, 2020. So I just don't think that was really that helpful. And then they had Officer Chang, who was actually, I didn't realize there was 5 of them. He was the 5th officer. There was 4 involved with Mr. Floyd, and he was the 5th officer who just, heard it, came to the scene to see what was happening. And he says he looks around and he's concerned about the crowd, he's concerned for the officer's safety about the crowd. Well, that's what he says, but at the end of the day, Derek Chauvin and the other officers weren't concerned about their safety because they never called for backup. And that would be the first thing that you do if you are remotely concerned as an officer about your safety concerning a crowd. You don't wait till the crowd becomes unruly. You would call for backup right away. So if there is a problem, better safe than sorry, as my mom used to always say. You at least have people there ready to assist you. So Officer Chang was like, a nothing burger. And then they brought back the Minneapolis medical support coordinator, that is her title, to get back on this topic that Mr. Floyd could have died from excited delirium. And excited delirium is caused by drug use, and that can cause you to have a heart attack right away. And, okay, that's what she said on direct. But then when on cross-examination, she really helped, because she said, well, if a police officer thinks someone has ingested drugs and they could be subject to excited delirium, then what the police officer is supposed to do is put them on their side, the very thing that Derek Chauvin did not do and the very thing that caused Mr. Floyd's death. So I just don't see where these witnesses are, going to be much helpful. In reality, what the defense should do, and they are going to bring on, I believe, a medical examiner from the state of Maryland, unfortunately the state that I was born in. But anyway, they're going to bring on a medical examiner, and that's really their best case, to talk about causation, but to talk about it from the aspect and point of view of a medical profession, not all these other people who come to the scene are going to discuss it, but just dealing straight up with the autopsy report. I don't know if that'll help them or not.
Yeah. Are we seeing, Debbie Hines, are we seeing a new day when these kinds of smear the dead guy defenses just don't work anymore?
We don't know yet, Tom. It's too soon to tell. I mean, I want to be hopeful and optimistic about this case, but at the end of the day, racism seems to raise its ugly head in America and everything, and more particularly in these types of cases. So I don't really want to go that far, because we don't really know who's actually on the jury, and we don't really get a lot of commentary either online or in other news sources about what the members of the jury are looking at when they are actually listening to the testimony, because there's a lot to be said when you can actually see the jury. You, as a trial attorney, you can read some things into their body language and how they're perceiving testimony.
Which raises an interesting question. I know that we can't see the jury on TV, but there are people in the courtroom who have been reporting on the jury's demeanor. I have not been following those reports. Have you? Is there any feedback that might give us a sense of where this is going to go? We have about 30 seconds, Debbie.
Yeah, I think what I've heard is, there's been favorable, feedback, but there's also things to be, from when you can read positive body language, but there's also a lot to be said for people who are stoic. And that I haven't heard, because those are the people that you want to be concerned about, where you're not eliciting any type of emotion from them from a very emotional trial and testimony. So that's what we look at, not just the people shaking their head or the people going like this, but the people who are just sitting there and not responding at all.
Yeah, that's what we want to keep an eye on. Debbie Hines, trial lawyer, former Attorney General Assistant Attorney General for Michigan, former prosecutor, political commentator. I am Debbie Hines on Twitter and .com. Debbie, thanks again so much for dropping by and sharing your expertise with us. Great talking with you. We'll be back with more of the news of the day and your calls in just a moment. Also, Meagan Hatcherth-Mays is going to be with us, lawyer and director of democracy policy at indivisible.org.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
The past year proves that a lot
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More information at hellofresh.com, code TOM. CB Distillery for sleeping and pain relief. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. Annie's Kit Club's creativity delivered right to your door. More info is available at annieskitclubs.com/Tom. EasyFlow, personal air filtration system. Fresh air anywhere. More info at easyflowusa.com, code TOM. Masterclass with world-class instructors. More info at masterclass.com/Hartman. And Dinovite, only the best all-natural pet supplements. More info at dinovite.com.
We say fight back!
Our book for the book report today. Our book for the book report today is Taking Bullets, Terrorism and Black Life in 21st Century America, Confronting White Nationalism, Supremacy, Privilege, Plutocracy, and Oligarchy, a Poet's Representation and Challenge by Haki R. Madhuburi. He writes, this is from the chapter, page 27, the chapter Terror in the Midst of Prayer and Empire. In our perpetual state of national mourning, where our eyes are watered out and our hearts cease to heal at the rate the Creator meant them to, we hold hands in profound silence as we remember the Mother Emanuel 9 of Charleston, South Carolina, those 9 mothers, fathers, sisters, and brothers. Even before burying, before black earth covered their caskets, too many ministers, media pundits, and plain white and black folks downgraded the terror that quickened their deaths of our finest in this land to the mental illness and race hatred, in quotes, of a single young white man. He may have acted alone, but he was not alone in his thinking, encouragement, gathering of arms, warped consciousness, confirmation, or ahistorical views, and yeses from the millions in the nation who proudly wear and display the Confederate flag above their hearts and fly it in all of its traitorous glory over a state capitol and other institutions.
Again, we find ourselves at war with history and culture, entertaining another call for a national conversation on race, and a president weary of trying to make sense of and comfort the grief-stricken nation with words from the highest office of the land. This was written while Obama was president. These are the facts, not an opinion or the ignorant ranting of compromised preachers and television pundits. A 21-year-old white man, a citizen of South Carolina, walked into the sacred and spiritual home of the Emmanuel African Methodist Episcopal Church of Charleston, the historic home of black liberation fighter Denmark Vesey, and fatally killed 9 of its members, including the pastor, during Bible study. This was a pure act of domestic terrorism. A modern-day lynching by a young white nationalist who coolly and calmly assassinated 9 black members of Mother Emanuel. Domestic violence and acts of terrorism are on the rise in the United States, as detailed by Charles Kurzman and Daniel Schanzer in their New York Times op-ed, The Other Threat, where they state that, quote, the main terrorist threat in the United States is not from violent Muslim extremists, but from right-wing extremists, end quote. In their national research, local police agencies across the country identified, quote, the militias, neo-Nazis, and sovereign citizens as the major threat the nation faces in regard to extremism, end quote. All of this is homegrown with international connections. Morris Dees and J. Richard Cohen of the Southern Poverty Law Center also writes in the New York Times article, Racists Without Borders, that, quote, Americans tend to view attacks like the mass murder in Charleston as isolated hate crimes, the work of a deranged racist or a group of zealots lashing out in anger unconnected to a broader movement. This view we can no longer afford to indulge. When, according to survivors, Mr. Roof told the victims at the prayer meeting that black people were, quote, taking over the country, he was expressing sentiments that unite white nationalists from the United States and Canada to Europe, Australia, and New Zealand. Unlike those of the Civil Rights era, whose main goal was to maintain Jim Crow in the American South, today's white supremacists don't see borders. They see a white tribe under attack by people of color across the globe. The end of white rule in Rhodesia, now Zimbabwe, and South Africa, they believe, foreshadowed an apocalyptic future for all white people, a white genocide that must be stopped before it's too late. End of quote. The internationalization of terrorism is not a foreign theory in today's social media world. Dees and Cohen will be speaking at a conference in Budapest about this transnational white supremacism that is emerging as the world grows more connected technologically. The message of white genocide is spreading. Also, David J. Whitaker's Terrorism, Understanding the Global Threat, gives another view. Clearly, our rush to forgive this mass murderer within 96 hours of this supreme tragedy is misguided, anti-human, and does not allow for properly grieving the fallen. As perfectly scripted, displaying the permanent effectiveness of Christian acculturation on the Sunday, June 21st, 2015 morning services of Mother Emanuel Church, the black Christians out-Christianed their white brothers and sisters. Before the morning sermon, the presiding elder, Reverend Norvell Goff Sr., found it necessary to thank the local, state, and federal law enforcement agencies for doing their job. He also stated, quote, a lot of folks expected us to do something strange and break out in a riot. Well, they just don't know us. We are people of faith, end quote. I find this statement inappropriate, insensitive, and ahistorical, implying, whether he meant it or not, that the recent uprising and rebellions in Ferguson, New York, Cleveland, and other parts of the nation were riots and did not include black people of faith, and that somehow they were strange in their social, political, and economic activism. Informed people do not riot against injustice or white terrorism. They study, organize, and strategically struggle at all levels, in the streets, on the campus, in front of the White House, and in corporate boardrooms. Dylan Roof stated his stated intentions were to start a race war, and informed black leadership understands that we cannot pray this away or appeal to any law enforcement agency that all across the country, including Charleston, has been seriously compromised. To label black reaction to murder, terrorism, deep unemployment, substandard housing, etc., as riot is to blame the victim. The book, Taking Bullets.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back to the third hour of our program. On the line with us is Meagan Hatcher-Mays, a lawyer and the director of democracy policy at indivisible.org. Meagan's Twitter handle is Important Meagan, M-E-A-G-A-N, or Indivisible Team. And Meagan, welcome back to the program. There are a couple of obvious priorities, you know, overcoming the filibuster, making D.C. a state, the For the People Act that will not be able to pass without overcoming the filibuster. Where do we start, and where is Indivisible starting?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to do. I know everyone's still sort of like in this sort of exciting moment where it's like, oh, wow, Trump is finally gone. We can finally do some stuff. But we haven't been able to get as much done as I think a lot of activists would have hoped. And part of the reason is because of the filibuster. The filibuster is blocking us from bringing up really popular pieces of legislation for a vote because, you know, especially when it comes to democracy reform, there just aren't 10 Republicans in the Senate who would join the other 50 Democrats in fixing our democracy. So that's been a challenge. The good news is that I know everyone's got all of their attention focused on Joe Manchin because he has been pretty vociferous and, you know, with the idea, vociferously against the idea of eliminating the filibuster outright, and as well as Kyrsten Sinema of Arizona. But we've made a lot of headway with other moderate Democrats who you might not expect to be so excited about getting rid of the filibuster. And a lot of that comes down to the grassroots. That we know we've had our groups in Colorado and in Maine and in California even pushing their senators in the right direction on the filibuster. And we've gotten commitments from Dianne Feinstein. We've heard really good things out of the new senators in Georgia saying they don't want the filibuster to get in the way of voting rights. Amy Klobuchar, who's a pretty moderate Democrat, has said she wants to get rid of the filibuster. Tina Smith, also of Minnesota, says she wants to get rid of it. So we're making headway. We've just got two big sort of Joe Manchin, Kyrsten Sinema-sized targets left to go before we can really start to address some of these major structural problems facing our democracy at the moment.
What's the best way to reach out to them or influence them? I realize that on the one side you've got, I mean, every politician vulnerable to pressure from their base, from the grassroots, and also obviously from lobbyists and whatnot. But also, you've got the possibility of a Joe Lieberman kind of situation, or probably Jim Jeffords is a better example. I lived in Vermont when Jim Jeffords left the Republican Party. The Senate was 50-50. George W. Bush was president, and that flipped the Senate from Republican control to Democratic control. It was a huge crisis for the Republican Party. They never thought that leaning on Jim Jeffords would produce that outcome. It did. How do we do this in a way that doesn't blow up in our faces?
Yeah, that's a good question. You know, again, Joe Manchin is very moderate, but I don't think he really would ever want to become a Republican. Maybe I'm naive, but we'll see.
Well, Jim Justice, the governor of West Virginia, did. You know, he was elected as a Democrat, and he flipped party affiliation. Now, granted, that was in I think that was right after the 2016 election, wasn't it? After he and Trump came into office together? Yeah. So it was kind of a different time, but forgive the interruption.
Oh, it's okay. So I think that the goal in general, regardless of who you're talking to about the need to get rid of the filibuster, is not to say, oh, you know this old Senate rule, you don't really even need to get into the weeds of Senate procedure and rules and all of that stuff. The important thing is that whatever it is that motivates you to be a part of this movement, to be a progressive and to, you know, vote and go out there and vote for the person that you like, whatever that issue is, whether that's gun safety or labor law or democracy or climate change, all of that stuff is getting blocked by the filibuster. And so I think for folks like Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema, it's a matter of, you know, looking at their priorities. Right now, I don't think there is a priority out there that you could get 10 Republicans to support. You know, I know that Joe Manchin has really strong relationships to labor in West Virginia. He obviously cares a lot about health care. You know, if we want to fix those things, we have to get rid of the filibuster. He wrote a whole op-ed about how he thinks, you know, he could find bipartisan support for democracy reform. I don't think that that's quite right, but give it a shot. Maybe he will find those 10. But if not, we really need to figure out a way forward. And I do actually think that at the end of the day, Joe Manchin is not going to want to be the one solely responsible for blocking pretty much every single piece of legislation together or from going forward, just because he wasn't able to find any Republicans to join him.
Yeah.
And he did say
Go ahead.
Oh, he did say that in his op-ed that he felt that Democrats had a responsibility to work with Republicans, but that Republicans had the responsibility to stop saying no to everything. So I think that's really kind of a key piece of that op-ed that got glossed over. I was very mad about it too, but I think what he really is saying is that I want to give them the chance, but I don't want to give them a full-on veto. So I think we'll have to kind of wait and see what happens there, but Senator Manchin has his priorities, and I think at a certain point he's going to realize that there is probably not a path forward with bipartisan support in this current iteration of the Senate.
Well, let's hope that this is just the dance that he has to do to be able to say when he does, pull the trigger, as a terrible metaphor in this day and age, when he does choose to end the filibuster, to vote to end the filibuster, that he can say, I tried 16 ways to Sunday. I did everything possible, and they wouldn't go along. I mean,
Exactly.
Now, but what about Kristen Sinema? I mean, she came up in local politics. She started out as a moderate. She became a Bernie Sanders progressive. She was big on Bernie and his positions. That got her into the Senate. And now all of a sudden, she's like wanting to caucus with the Republicans on some issues. What's going on with her?
Such a good question. I think our Arizona groups want to know the exact same thing. Our folks in Arizona fought really hard to help her beat McSally, and she did. And I think it's been really disappointing to see her get into the Senate and kind of throw up her hands and say, well, nothing I can do here. Whether that's, kind of voting against the minimum wage, which was really insulting, to refusing to even consider the possibility of eliminating the filibuster. I mean, we're in crunch time right now as far as our democracy goes, and she should understand this better than almost anybody in the Senate, other than Senator Warnock and Senator Ossoff. She should understand this better than anyone, because just like Georgia, Arizona is facing a slew of anti-democratic, little d democratic, anti-democratic voter suppression bills, racist suppression bills requiring very strict voter ID. These are the sorts of things that create those long lines that we see every November. This is going to affect her personally if Arizona is successful in targeting specific types of voters from participating in elections. And we cannot pass the John Lewis Voting Rights Act and the For the People Act unless we get rid of the filibuster. So she says she's a supporter of those two bills, but she also needs to support a path forward to get it done. And I know that our groups in Arizona are ready to help her see the light in that particular regard.
So my understanding is that the John Lewis Voting Act basically is restoring the Voting Rights Act, things like preclearance and those kinds of issues, whereas the For the People Act kind of standardizes elections across the country, so it's harder for Republicans to play games and create long lines and all that kind of stuff. Is that an accurate characterization, and are they equally important?
Yeah, you really need to do them together. So what the For the People Act does is set sort of like minimum standards for federal elections, although that would have the effect of just affecting all elections because states don't have the money or the funds to run two separate, like, parallel tracks of elections. So for the purposes of this conversation, it would set minimum standards for federal elections, which would mean that no state could give you any less. They couldn't deny you rights below that threshold. So that's what the For the People Act does. And it also has a lot of really good campaign finance reforms, disclosure requirements, ethics requirements for the executive branch and elsewhere. It actually requires presidential candidates to turn over their tax returns, things like that. So it's a good government bill. It deals with elections and election security and election integrity, but it also deals with making sure that the government is trustworthy, making sure that the people who work for the government are ethically moral and ethically upright. And the For the People Act, the John Lewis Voting Rights Act restores the Voting Rights Act, just like you said, to prevent bad stuff from going into effect.
There you go. Meagan Hatcher-Mays, Democracy Policy Director at indivisible.org. One of the great sites out there. Important Meagan and Indivisible team on Twitter. Meagan, thanks so much for dropping by.
Thanks, Tom.
Great talking with you. We'll be back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
We'll be back in just a minute. It's 15 minutes past the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program. Stick around. And welcome back. Jonathan in Portland, Oregon. Hey, Jonathan, thanks for watching us on YouTube. What's up?
Hi, Tom. I got another idea for a chapter in your book about the slave patrols and how the slave patrols morphed into the debt collectors, because that's really what the police are, and that's why so many people are being killed, rather than limiting their activities to a small, the small amount of crime that they should. They've become the new debt collector. You go back to Ferguson, Missouri, where Michael Brown was killed, and that town ran their municipality on debt collection. It was 20% of the payroll was from fines and fees. And where did I get that information from? I got it from the Council of Economic Advisors, which issued a brief December 2015, which is an office in the White House where the White House gets all its economic advice from. This is what the police are now. They are going out, and towns are making money, and they're putting it on the backs of the poor. And all of the problems we see regarding racism, regarding crime, it really all comes down to money and mostly down to debt. And I think that's what is at the core of all this.
Yeah. In fact, there's a whole chapter about that in my new book on oligarchy, that debt is the instrument that was used to keep down and even functionally enslave even white people, in the first couple hundred years of our republic, and still is for people of all races. Debt is this extraordinary force that is being used to hold people down. And I had forgotten about the Michael Brown example in Ferguson. That is just so apropos. I mean, you're absolutely right, and something that we need to be paying more attention to. Jonathan, thank you. Excellent contribution to the conversation. Carol in Portola, California. Hey, Carol, what's on your mind today?
Hello, Tom. I certainly enjoy your program, and your books are most interesting, phenomenal. Anyway, I just want to reiterate and ask you why every time that you mention like insurance, malpractice insurance for cops, they change the subject or something. You'd never find out why they're against it. You would think,
well, they don't need it because they have qualified immunity, and they don't want to give up that immunity. You can't sue a cop, an individual cop. You can only sue the police department. And so the police unions are not going to talk about this until you take away their qualified immunity and put them in a category, at least this is my understanding of it, and put them in a category similar to doctors and nurses where they don't have qualified immunity. The institution is not the first, body that you go after. And, now granted, policing came out of policing is the face of government power, whereas physicians in many cases have private practices. So there was a whole different evolutionary path that got us here, protecting the individual physicians as opposed to the cops. But, Carol, I haven't seen a good argument against it either. And I think your point is very well made. Thank you very much for the call and for kicking that in there. We'll be right back. It's coming up on 20 minutes past the hour. Stick around. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. Hey, we have a new video out about the 1776 Commission. Remember this commission that Donald Trump put together to explain the history of America, to have true principles, because history is being distorted by things like the New York Times 1619 report, No, seriously, this is what Donald Trump said, that, we're engaging now in revisionist history by highlighting the history of slavery in the United States. And so he put together this bizarre commission, and now in the state of South Carolina, Senator Dwight Loftus and others have introduced legislation requiring that Trump's commission, which had no historians on it, 18 people, not a single historian, that commission's findings be taught as history in the public schools in South Carolina. It's absolutely mind-boggling. I mean, it's like they want to take us back to the 1930s. Check it out at thomhartmann.com. It's 21 minutes past the hour. We've got a lot on the table. Racism is the Republican Party actively trying to kill Americans as part of their 2022 election strategy, like Donald Trump did as part of his 2020 election strategy, only this time they're doing it to sabotage Democrats rather than to try to get Trump elected. What do we do about police use of force? The police officer who killed Mr. Wright recently has now resigned. Where is that going to go? What do we do about this? How do we reimagine policing in the United States? How do we reinvent this? You had Army Lieutenant Karan Nazario, the young, the second, I believe he's the second lieutenant, who was pulled over by the Windsor Police Department and beaten up. And then we've got, it's like step after step after step. How can we look at this and not say something is fundamentally wrong here? And I realize I've been saying that for the 18 years I've been doing this program. And, many Americans have been saying it for a hell of a lot longer than that. But it's time for some solutions. It's time to do something. And I think that, frankly, the George Floyd, Justice in Policing Act is a great place to start. Anyhow, picking up your phone calls and thoughts on this, David in Palatine, Illinois. Hey, David, what's up?
Yeah, hi, Tom. What I think that is police, the everyday police officer, shouldn't have guns issued. Only a very select few police officers that really need to go into a situation should
Which is how they used to do it in the UK,
Right. And the reason is because when these police officers make a stop and it's involved with an African-American, a black man, for whatever reason, well, it's probably racism, the situation just escalates immediately, and their odds of surviving it, the black person, is pretty diminished, and so they're given no benefit of the doubt. So I just think one way to protect them is just remove the gun from the officer, and that would hopefully solve some of these killings.
When you consider the reality, and it is a reality, that most police officers in their entire career never discharge their weapon. The idea that every single cop has to have a gun does start to seem kind of weird. And I realize it's gun culture in America and everything else, but David, I think that your suggestion is brilliant and something that we should be thinking of very carefully. We need to change the whole culture around guns in America back to what it was like. Back when I was a kid, I remember in Cub Scouts and Boy Scouts, the NRA coming in and doing training for us. I had a BB gun. My friends we went hunting with their parents. We all understood. The first thing was, this is a weapon. It's designed to kill things, including people. It's not a toy. It's you respect this, and that whole shtick. And now it's like, you've got members of Congress posing in front of 15 weapons on the wall behind them, and they think it's some kind of macho thing, like, making up for their sexual inadequacies or something. It's just totally bizarre, the direction we've gone with this. And our police departments, ever since Reagan's 1099 program, where the military takes any old leftover stuff they've got and hands it off to the cops every year so that they can order more stuff to keep their budget cranked. And of course, this all works out to the benefit of the defense contractors who get to sell more stuff. I mean, it's like the perfect storm of crazy. David, I got to run, but thank you for the call. Louisa in Roseville, California. Hey, Louisa, your thoughts?
Yeah, hi, Tom. It's really Lisa, but that's okay. I just want to let you know that you're listening to a happy listener. I try to watch you every day you're on, and it's like an addiction to me, but it's a happy, positive one. Anyway, the reason I called is because I want to comment and add to what one of your former callers today talked about as far as the changes in the Democrat and Republican Party that I feel need to happen. I've observed over the years, and I'm the same age as you, we have seen a huge swing to the right of both parties. And I think a lot of people probably do not realize this. And I would like to ask you if you could once in a while comment on your show about that, because a lot of people are not aware. And if we had the Republican Party become more to the left and absorb some of those centrist Democrats and then form a party, a progressive party as a Democratic party, like the Movement for the People's Party that Nick Brown is trying to get off the ground and develop, that's what needs to happen.
Lisa, I don't disagree with you. I do think that we also have to understand that the reason why both parties moved to the right was because the Supreme Court changed the rules of the game of politics in the 70s when they made it legal for billionaires and corporations to own politicians. And so we need to change the rules of the game again, and that requires amending the Constitution to get around the Supreme Court and say, money is not speech and corporations are not people. Lisa, thank you. Great commentary.
To the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
We'll be back with more of your calls and the news of the day right after this.
Our book today is Can We All Be Feminists? It's a collection of essays edited by Jane Eric Udori. This first chapter, or first essay, is from Charlotte Shane. It's called No Wave Feminism. If you feel like feminism is failing you, you're not alone. I sometimes have the impression that I'm as thoroughly feminist as I am thoroughly human. That feminism is as intrinsic to my contribution to my constitution as my skeleton is to my body. But in my 35 years, I've struggled with or outright rejected feminism on several occasions. First, as an ignorant adolescent, what do women need feminism for if they already got the vote? Then, as a sex worker who saw how regularly and even gleefully feminists stoked the public's long-standing antipathy toward professionally sexual women. And now again, as someone moving even further into the far left, who cannot abide the forms of feminism that embrace and are complicit with the worst aspects of liberalism. The more I learn about the intersecting oppressive forces that continue to shape the Western world, colonialism, patriarchy, capitalism, xenophobia, and racism, and the network of cruel social machinery to which these systems give rise, incarceration, crippling debt, disenfranchisement, deportation, and so on, the less sense it makes to use gender as the primary lens through which to regard human-engineered suffering. Feminism doesn't feel like the sharpest weapon to wield against white supremacy or border policing, for instance, or even the best tool with which to approach basic civic concerns like vibrant schools. That's not because those issues don't impact women. Obviously, they directly and indirectly impact many, but they don't necessarily impact women more or in dramatically different ways than they do men. In other words, the most significant challenges these issues present aren't tethered to one's sex, and so prioritizing gender above other aspects of identity limits one's realm of ethical responses. Here's an example. American prisons often keep female prisoners shackled while they give birth. There are variations on the theme. Some women are shackled during labor, some are unshackled, but then shackled again almost immediately afterward, and almost all are shackled while heavily pregnant. There's some variation of what shackling entails, too. It can mean being cuffed at the wrists or at the ankles, or both, or cuffed to a hospital bed or chained at the waist. Articulating these details makes the sadism even starker. A class-action federal lawsuit in 2017 alleged more than 40 women at the Milwaukee County Jail suffered this horror. It was preceded by lawsuits in 2014 and 2016 against that same jail for similar practice. But the appalling practice is hardly confined to one city or one state. In 2015, New York prisons were found to be shackling prisoners in labor in spite of a state law that made it illegal to do so. And according to a 2016 report by the Prison Birth Project and Prisoners Legal Services of Massachusetts, jails and prisons in Massachusetts were guilty of similar violations. Most feminists probably agree that this is a feminist issue. The topic accordingly receives coverage on feminist websites and sometimes in women's magazines. But does a feminist obligation to attend to the rights of the imprisoned extend only as far as pregnancy and labor? Or is it a feminist issue when a non-pregnant woman is shackled? Or when she is caged for years and exploited for her labor, denied face-to-face visits from loved ones, held captive in a compound in the name of, quote, justice? If the answer to these questions is yes, then it is also a feminist issue. Then is it also a feminist issue when men are shackled during various health emergencies, seizures, say? In 2014, a male inmate in Colorado died after undergoing several seizures while in restraints and receiving no medical treatment. Is it a feminist issue when incarcerated men are denied the right to visit with family or exploited for their labor? Is it a feminist issue when so many men are raped while in prison? Or does feminism's responsibility begin and end with gender-based mistreatment? The feminists hired by prominent media outlets often advocate for measures that would result in higher levels of incarceration. They write op-eds in favor of further criminalization around sex work and call for longer prison sentences for men convicted of assault, which we've known for decades is not necessarily synonymous with men who committed the crime. They also disturbingly relish the theater of sentencing, like that enacted by Judge Rosemary Aquilina, who told serial sexual abuser Larry Nassar that if she could, she would allow some or many people to do to him what he did to others. So sexual violation is an atrocity unless it happens to the right person. They capitalize on women's justified fear and anger around mistreatment by men to shore up the status quo, to suggest that our current problems are not the result of fundamentally unjust institutions, but rather institutions that are only incidentally sexist. That means that those same institutions could become less so with the right adjustments, like more draconian sentencing for crimes against women, or more female judges. But the prison system is racist and brutal by design, not by accident or mismanagement, just as the court system regularly fails the most vulnerable because it was built to protect the powerful. The challenge of the 21st century is not to demand equal opportunity to participate in the machinery of oppression, revolutionary thinker Angela Davis has written. Rather, it is to identify and dismantle those structures. Yet leveraging our existing legal system for criminalization remains the go-to strategy for most feminists when it comes to dealing with objectionable behavior. The book, Can We All Be Feminists?
Share the Thom Hartmann Program with your friends. We're available on SiriusXM, Free Speech TV, Pacifica, commercial stations nationwide, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, on the Thom Hartmann app, and you can even tell your smart speaker to listen to the Thom Hartmann Program. Welcome back. 34 minutes past the hour. Thom Hartmann here with you. Dennis in Sarasota, Florida. Hey, Dennis, thanks for listening to WMNF. You had some thoughts on this. It says here you're a retired trial attorney who used to try cases against the police.
That's true, Tom, and good afternoon.
Dennis?
Qualified immunity doesn't prohibit civil actions against law enforcement officers. I've brought at least half a dozen to a dozen myself. What it does not prevent you from suing cops for doing obviously wrong things. If the qualification, as I recall it, and it's been a while since I researched it, but more in a general statement, if the act in question has never been adjudicated by a court before as being a violation of civil rights, then basically it's one free bite at the apple. But that doesn't, I've never really seen one in my practice. The usual lawsuits for excessive force, false arrest, false imprisonment are routinely filed. So there's not really an impediment to an action against law enforcement officers. And the usual vehicle for bringing the suit is the 1866 Civil Rights Act. It's now codified in 42 U.S.C. Section 1983, which makes any person acting under a color of state law who deprives a person of constitutional rights
is subject to an action for damages, as well as for payment of attorney's fees to the plaintiff's attorney. You get a jury trial in a federal court, which is the best place to bring these, because then you don't have people worrying about their local taxes going up. Myself, I would file civil rights actions against law enforcement up in Tampa so as to avoid Sarasota and Bradenton juries, because I'd be suing a Sarasota or a Bradenton deputy or police officer. So it's not really a high hurdle.
So you are...
It doesn't really exist for most cases.
So it is possible to sue police officers. What are your thoughts? What are your thoughts on number one, how often that's successful? Number two, whether or not police officers should have liability insurance like doctors and nurses, or is that analogy not at all apt? And number three, this whole issue of qualified immunity.
Insurance is available, and most agencies have it. It's akin to a malpractice policy. And in state
for the individual officers, or for the local agency?
For the officers and for their own employers. You have vicarious liability of the employer. So actions performed by a law enforcement officer in the line of duty, so to speak, make him or her and the employing agency legally liable if civil rights are violated. So it covers both. And another thing about going into federal court, some states like Florida have a limitation on damages. There is no such limitation in federal court.
So what's the solution to the problem that we have?
Say again?
Yeah. So what's the solution? I mean, that's kind of the after the fact best solution is, sue. And certainly people do that and they get, good judgments and settlements. But how do we reform our policing from your point of view as a guy who's, prosecuted cops over the years?
Well, not only did I prosecute,
or is that
I was
not the
also
problem?
An informal advisor to the Manatee Sheriff's Department after we ran off a bad sheriff and got a good one. The lawyers who were handling these sorts of suits, because I wasn't the only one. There were several other firms. But we literally ran a corrupt sheriff out of office. And the new sheriff who ran against the corrupt sheriff was a college professor of law enforcement, and he was a great sheriff. So I would be consulted by one of his senior staff as to what I thought about this, that, or the other thing. And with respect to law enforcement officers, you have to remember that it's not the easiest job in the world. It's not the toughest. As I understand it, firefighters have a more dangerous job than law enforcement officers. But nonetheless, it is somewhat stressful. So you have to understand that if they're out there every day, and if they're in South Central LA, for example, or the South Side of Chicago, where there's a lot of conflict, these officers need a lot of support. And I recommended that they have a staff psychologist on there to deal with the traumatic stress that officers can be confronted with, so as they don't become PTSD cases and thereby getting a little crazy on the street every now and then. So you want to recognize the difficulties. Yeah. Then you also want to, if I was in charge, I would give every applicant a Myers-Briggs or a Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Index test to find out their personality profiles and see if they had any psychological or psychiatric disorders that would preclude them from withstanding the stresses of being out on the street every day. So pick a good officer, support them, and make sure you don't let nut jobs in.
Yeah, I'm with you. Dennis, I gotta move along, but thank you. Thanks so much for the benefit of your experience and the insights you offer. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And great talking with you. Gar in Atlanta, Georgia. Hey, Gar, what's on your mind today?
Oh, how you doing there, Tom? Been listening to you for a long time. I just like to make a couple points. What your last caller was talking about, policemen used to live in the neighborhood. Now they don't have to live in your neighborhood. To me, that's the biggest problem. When I was growing up, you knew all the policemen by first name, and they knew you. They knew your parents. But now, they bring. The policemen from, they didn't have suburbs then. And almost, because I grew up with mostly, a lot of Caucasian, we was all in one neighborhood. Then the suburbs came, and then everything changed. But I want to talk a little bit about the mud seal theory. I know you know a little bit about that, James Henry Hammond, that we need a lower class.
You're talking from the 19th century, from the 1800s?
Right. And this is what's going on today.
Okay.
And the mud seal theory is that we must have a lower class for the upper class to rest on. And that's what's going on with the policemen. Right. They want to keep a lower class. Okay, like last week, Black Lives Matter protested against a Caucasian killed in Lansing, Michigan, just like George Floyd. This was in Lansing, Michigan. And Black Lives, you didn't hear nothing about that. You didn't hear nothing about that because they don't want blacks and poor and working whites to come together. That's why you didn't hear nothing about that.
Sure. That was Martin Luther King's big crime.
Yeah, and to me, that's the problem. I mean, Black Lives Matter marched for this Caucasian killed by the police, but no news coverage of it. None.
Yeah.
And I think it's because they want that mud seal theory. They want that lower class for the upper class to rest on. Okay? Look up the mud seal theory by James Henry Hammond, and you should read it one day. Thank you.
Yeah. Got it. Thank you, Gar. Ted in Hattsboro, Pennsylvania. Hey, Ted, what's up?
Hi, Tom. This is first time caller, and I've tried to get to you 3 times. This is the third time. I wanted to tell you that there was things that really bothered me. I went to a gun store one time and I was buying guns, and I told them that when you buy a gun, you should have responsibility for the gun. And the guy that's selling me the gun looked at me like I had 2 heads. I said, my responsibility.
Yeah, we're selling toys here.
Huh? Yeah,
we're selling toys here.
It was selling toys. I looked at him like he had 2 heads. Like, hey, look, my responsibility of owning a gun is to keep you so you can still have it. And you go around here selling guns to guys that wants to shoot anything that moves.
Yeah. Yeah.
Are they out of their
minds? It's unfortunate.
And then they don't want their guns taken away, and then they trash the doggone Capitol building. What kind of crap is that? What do you expect people to do? I said, if you don't want nothing to happen, don't do anything to cause it.
Yeah. I'm with you, Ted. I'm absolutely with you. Thank you for the call. Rudy in Atlanta. Hey, Rudy, your thoughts?
Well, Tom, you and I have been talking about racism for a while.
Yep.
If we don't watch it, if the grown-ups in the room, if there are any more grown-ups in the room, racism is going to take this country down. I think Putin and the other world leaders, they understand what racism has done to this country. But anyway, Tom, enjoy your show, man. I love you. Take care, all right?
Well, thank you, Rudy. Yeah, I think, Rudy, I would say, you say racism is going to take this country down. I would go so far as to say racism has held this country back. 400 years of racism has held this country back. By the middle of the 1800s, as the Southern Confederacy had risen up and turned the South into an absolute police state for people of all races, but in particular, obviously, for black people. By that period of time, the northeastern part of the United States had, you had, the Wright brothers, I think was right around that time. You had industrialization. You had the railroads going coast to coast. America was moving forward. We were right on the cusp of Thomas Edison and all his inventions, steel, rail, oil, inventions like crazy, industrialization. None of that was happening in the South. The South was still essentially a third world country. And to a large extent still is, if you use metrics like, infant mortality or maternal death or, hookworm infection or ringworm infection. I mean, it's just... Well, we will be back. It's 45 minutes past the hour. Pick up more of your phone calls on the other side of this break. Stick around.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Speaking the truth, the multinational corporations. We'd really rather you didn't know all about. Thom Hartmann here with you. We'll be right back. And welcome back. Joan in Rochester, Minnesota. Hey, Joan, this is all happening right in your backyard. What are your thoughts?
Yes, it is, and that's a little scary. Well, the policemen have been faced with a big dilemma. You know, they were formed to help the people in this country, and we all relied on that. And then early in 2000, I absolutely saw a video where the military was in a Minneapolis police station training police. Now, what choice did the police have at that time? Keep their jobs and absorb the military training, or leave because they couldn't do for the people what they had done before? And so what it's caused is a belief that they had no choices, and so the people had started to look at the police in a different way because they were acting in a different way to the people. And another thing I think is a problem for the police is I think that some of these hate groups have infiltrated and become police officers and might be responsible for some of the deaths of the black people. But I wish the police all the good luck in getting back to how they used to be, because I know that was what was in their heart. And I think the militarization, and like you said just a little while ago, the dumping of the stuff into the police hands by the military in this country has done a big disservice to everybody. They need to keep themselves out of our local business and get back to the business of protecting our country.
I think, though, Joan, that there's another and perhaps larger issue that is almost never discussed, and that is, where did policing in America come from? If you go back to England at the time of the American Revolution, they had laws in place. They were called maximum wage laws, that an employer could not pay people over a certain amount because they did not want a middle class to emerge. They viewed the middle class as a threat. They felt that there had to be a permanent underclass, and that underclass was necessary for the overclass, you know, for the wealthy, the lords, ladies, and the royal families, to be as rich as they were. And so the purpose of the police, one of the major purposes of the police in England at that time, was to police this lower class. In other words, to keep them in their place. And I think that we adopted an awful lot of that in the United States during that period of time in the 1700s, 16, 17, 1800s. And that to this day, a large chunk of the job that police officers are asked to do is basically keep people in their place, keep people down when they protest the fact that society has structured itself in a way that establishes that as their place.
Now, did the military police there, were they armed? Or were they like they are now? They're unarmed.
Oh, what you mean in England in the 1700s? I honestly don't know the answer to the question. I doubt that they were armed with what you would call a gun, because those were hard to use and slow and expensive. But they certainly were armed with billy clubs. I mean, that was, you know, those stories are legendary. Dickens tells them in at least one of his books. So, and Dickens really knew. I mean, you know, he was 100 years later, but he absolutely knew what it was like in England at that time and why. So, Joan, excellent points all. Thank you so much for the call. I do appreciate it. It's coming up on 10 minutes past the hour. We will be back in a little more than just 1 minute after I just have to read an ad here on the commercial side, and we'll be right back. Stick around. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. Gretchen Reynolds over at the New York Times has been compiling for the last year or so, maybe a little longer, but I've been noticing it for the last year, some just remarkable statistics and information coming out of peer-reviewed scientific journals about the benefits of very, very small, short amounts of exercise on the quality of life and the lifespan, you know, the ability to survive disease of all of us. Right? Some of the studies were on younger people. A lot of the studies were on people over 50. And I'm talking very small amounts of exercise, like literally 4 minutes of bicycling, or 4 seconds, excuse me, of bicycling really hard on a stationary bicycle, followed by 56 seconds of just relaxing, and doing that 15 times, over a 15-minute period, a couple of times a week. 4 seconds of exercise produce measurable results. It's all over at thomhartmann.com. We got a new video up for the people who are supporters of our program. You can check it out. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and Ben in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Hey, Ben, you're on the air. What are your thoughts?
Hey, Tom, long-time listener, first-time caller. A couple segments ago...
Thank you, Ben.
You referenced, you asked, how can we reimagine the police? What does that look like? And I've got a couple very specific ideas that I think would be impactful right away. And the first one should be looked at through the lens of the Stanford prison experiment. If you dress somebody up like a badass, they're going to act like a badass. And I think about travel.
Yeah, for people who don't know what you're talking about, Ben, you might want to encapsulate that experiment in a couple of sentences.
So the Stanford prison experiment was a situation where students were divided into two groups. One was the prisoners, and the other were the prison guards, the keepers. And within a very short time, it degraded into an abusive, bad situation that actually had to be stopped by administration because it was out of hand. And it was out of hand because the people that were the guards were, they were given khaki shirts and khaki pants and mirrored sunglasses, and wow, it went straight to their heads, and it got completely out of hand. So my point is that you dress the police like public servants. You make them drive Prius with a big yellow stripe down the middle. They have safety vests on, and you remove all the, how to put this delicately, big dick
all the military
stuff.
Trappings. Yeah,
that's right. And you elevate the concept of being honorable by truly watching out for the public's best interest, not your brother's interest, because the risk comes along with the job. So obviously they want to go home at night. I don't have a problem with that, but you don't put your own safety in front of public safety. That's the first big piece. And the second big piece is that it has to be hard to become a cop, and they're much better paid. You take all those resources that are sent to armored vehicles and specialized weaponry and so forth, and you direct it to psychological evaluation, training that actually impacts their interaction with the public, and it goes on for a year and a half. And what that does is it effectively weeds out all the cops who just want to get in it because it's badass, for the girls, for the guns, for the prestige. And you make it about the honor of public service as opposed to the Camaro with racing wheels and your cool uniform and all the stuff. I mean,
got it.
If
I got it.
Like, yeah, that's it. That's it, really. You change the culture by changing the mindset, and you make it hard to become a cop so that only truly dedicated public servants, people that are motivated to serve.
I'm completely with you, Ben. And this is, I've said many times on this program, the two people who hold our present and our future, the quality of life in our present and our future in their hands, are the police and our teachers. And we underpay both of them dramatically, and we have very high standards for teachers. We don't generally for cops, and we need to get there. Ben, I love all your ideas. I think that Reagan's 1099 program, the hyper-militarization of the police, was probably one of the major things that set up this situation today and got us where we're at, and it needs to be reversed too. Ben, thank you. Matt in Milwaukee. Hey, Matt, what's up?
Hey, Tom. Long time I haven't called you, and I love to talk to you.
Thank you.
Thank you for taking my call. But I wanted to get to the point is people who have not asked black people, like maybe they don't have a black friend, maybe they don't have interactions with black people. I'm from Phoenix. I moved out here to Milwaukee, and I didn't know as many black people. And after that happened with George Floyd, I started seeing video after video on YouTube of different scenarios where they are obviously racially profiling. They obviously overreact and they go to their gun when at first thing and they have them step out of the car for nothing. And I thought about all the times I've been pulled over, and I'm scared of the cops too. You know, I was young, but I never had a cop pull a gun on me, ever. And you see the George Floyd
You're a
one,
white guy.
that was the first thing they did. And I think people need to understand your interaction with police officers isn't theirs, and they don't understand that. And if we could just go back to having these guys get called out to respond to emergencies instead of on there enforcing all these little minor traffic violations. I mean, they were telling the guy in Virginia that they can just arrest him or they can let this thing go. They're blackmailing him.
Yeah.
It's incredible.
Yeah, essentially. Yeah, we don't want to hurt your military career, so let's not talk about this. Yeah. Matt, spot on. And you're absolutely right. The experience, white people who think they understand police don't understand police. Thanks so much for being with us today. We'll be back tomorrow, same bat time, same bat channel. In the meantime, don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. It requires you to participate. So check out indivisible.org and all the other great organizations out there. Check in with your local Democratic Party. Show up. We all have to make this democracy work, this republic work. So tag you're it. We'll see you tomorrow. Have a great afternoon. Be good to yourself and the people around you. We'll see you tomorrow.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More information at hellofresh.com, code TOM. CB Distillery for sleeping and pain relief. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. Annie's Kit Clubs, creativity delivered right to your door. More info is available at annieskitclubs.com/Tom. EasyFlow, personal air filtration system. Fresh air anywhere. More info at easyflowusa.com, code Tom. Masterclass with world-class instructors. More info at masterclass.com/Hartman. And Dinovite, only the best all-natural pet supplements. More info at dinovite.com.
We say fight back!